Qin Mu was filled with excitement as he walked towards the River Tomb Academy. He understood the deeper meaning of the actions of Saint Woodcutter and heavenly teacher Zishi. After the primordial realm broke through its seal, all kinds of powerful forces emerged. Amongst them, eternal peace was just a drop in the bucket. It was looked down upon and was deemed a pushover. When all the other forces deem you a pushover and all come running to pick on you, you will really be crushed. In order for eternal peace to survive in the danger-filled primordial realm, simply relying on the strength of the former subordinates of founding emperor wasn't enough. It first needed to make a name for itself. As for the title of the saint that appears once every 500 years, the various major heavens of the primordial realm wouldn't consider it a big deal. In comparison, the title of the unrivaled overlord body of eternal peace was more striking, thus selling Qin Mu's reputation was only natural. What was more crucial was the pact of Little Earth Count. Little Earth Count was the son of Yudu, the other self within Qin Mu's body, his older brother Qin Fengqing. Saint Woodcutter and the gods of the northern heavens laid down the pact of Little Earth Count, meaning they were swearing to Qin Fengqing, and thus also to Qin Mu. If the powerful individuals of the northern heavens defeated Qin Mu, even if Eternal Peace Empire didn't surrender, Qin Mu would also not do anything to Woodcutter. In restraining his brother Qin Fengqing, Qin Mu was still sure he could do it. Qin Fengqing would definitely grumble about it, but Qin Mu had confidence that he could convince him. On the other hand, should the gods of the northern heavens lose and not intend to honor the pact of Little Earth Count, the consequence was naturally to be eaten by the high-spirited Qin Fengqing. The constant source of worry for Qin Mu, which was the issue of his brother's diet, would thus be instantly resolved. More crucially, Eternal Peace Empire was an anti. Woodcutter and Zishi only had a single bargaining chip to gamble with the heavens of the north. The heavens of the north were in the hundreds, and this gamble would most likely get them something valuable in exchange for nothing. This exchange yielded definite profit with no risk, so of course the two crafty and tricky heavenly masters Woodcutter and Zishi would be able to come up with it. River Tomb Academy. This academy was designed by Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor, and it wasn't built within River Tomb County. River Tomb County was commerce-based and didn't have much land for academic development. Hence, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor built the River Tomb Academy along the Gold River Delta. At the Delta, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had invited the strong workers of Eternal Peace Empire to move several huge mountains, and then built the academy by the mountains. He also invited the likes of Blind, who were formation experts, to build a few floating palaces. He used a connected ropeway to surround the mountain with the palaces, like the petals of a flower. Apart from this, there were disciples of the academy who would test the formations, leaving imprints of all kinds of formations on rocks and mountains, causing the academy to be surrounded by giant floating rocks. Some scholars who were too lazy to walk would then choose to leap across the giant rocks instead. It could also be considered a unique site of River Tomb Academy. Qin Mu arrived with Celestial Venerable Yu. Looking from afar, they saw that River Tomb Academy was bustling with activity. There were youths in spells combat on the river surface, fighting unusually intensely. Waves were exploding out of the surface of the river, and divine arts burst out, making the roaring noises of giant beasts. It was stirring up havoc within the river. Suddenly, the huge waves atop the river's surface transformed into enormous icebergs. The icebergs flew out and spun around, making striking and explosive noises non-stop. Numerous ice swords grew out of the icebergs and flew out in all directions, attacking the surroundings. More icebergs rose from the river, producing a spectacular sight. The ice swords flew alongside the iceberg, and the sword techniques were so wonderful that they made everyone gasp in amazement. Qin Mu stopped in his tracks, exclaiming his admiration endlessly. Although River Tomb Academy was quite accomplished in its attainments of formation spells, it was still most well known for its sword techniques. This glacier sword technique was considered a rare ultimate skill that integrated 18 foundational sword techniques. Imperial Preceptor has produced many outstanding figures. The one executing the sword techniques is most likely an academician of sword studies from the academy. Qin Mu looked to the heart of the formation, only to see it was a woman in her 20s who was executing the sword techniques. However, he didn't recognize her. She was likely a rising star of eternal peace. At this very moment, A furious roar could be heard from the iceberg sword formation. A half-god giant several yards tall in height had held up the sword formation and was dashing towards the sword studies academician. His corporeal body was monstrous. He had 4 arms and carried a shield and hammer. He smashed the icebergs and shattered the ice swords. As the hammer made contact with the shield, it exploded with magic power, and circles of formation markings radiated in all directions, shattering all the flying swords in his way. The 4-armed half-god dashed towards the woman, leaping into the air and smashing his big hammer down mercilessly with abnormal courage. In regard to the exquisiteness of their divine arts, the half-god couldn't rival this academician of sword studies from River Tomb Academy. Yet, as a half-god, he was physically overpowering, and his powers were also much stronger than those of the human race. In addition, half-gods had the bloodline of ancient gods, and had certain special natural gifts of the ancient gods. Compared to the human race, they already had a very huge innate advantage purely due to their bloodline, and in close combat, they could even make use of their large physiques to break through their opponent's divine arts. This 4-armed half-god struck down with his huge hammer, causing the river water to burst apart. The woman bounced outwards into the sky, and although she was losing, she didn't lose her composure. Waving her hand, innumerous droplets of water from the river floated out and transformed into a water mirror that stood upright in the air. Rays of sword flashes emerged from the mirror and shot at the half-god together. The half-god cried out, shattering the floating water mirror into pieces. He shoved his shield forwards, and a thick and heavy wall of water immediately emerged from the Gold River's surface, stretching upwards to 100 yards tall and then smashing towards the woman. The sounds of cheering rang out from all around. This divine art of Qiu Xiaoyi is definitely going to make this little maiden not be able to get up. River Tomb Academy has already lost a dozen rounds. Where is the overlord body of eternal peace? Is he still not going to come out and embarrass himself? Get your imperial preceptor who appears once every 500 years to come out and receive his death. Qin Mu looked in the direction of the voices and saw many half-gods standing at the mountain gate of River Tomb Academy. There were apparitions of all kinds floating in the air. It was a bustling sight. There were also some half-gods who had cultivated to the god realm, and their divine glow pierced the heavens. Although there were gods in River Tomb Academy, their auras were weaker compared to these half-gods. These gods were confronting each other, and the gods of River Tomb Academy were being overwhelmed by them. It was a huge blow to the morale of those in River Tomb Academy. Some of the scholars in River Tomb Academy were also looking dejected, perhaps due to the blockade of the half-gods from the northern heavens. They had also lost more than they won against them, so their morale was on the decline. On the basis of divine arts, these scholars were naturally exceptional, but there was too wide a difference in innate advantage. As a result, it would be difficult for the scholars of the human race to win when they fought in the same realm. Geniuses like Qin Mu, Su Shanghua, and Zhe Huali, who walked at the forefront of their era and led the advancements of the era, wouldn't be able to sense the gap between the human race and the half-gods. However, to the other divine arts practitioners, this difference was only too apparent. Moreover, River Tomb Academy had sent a scholar from the academy to go up against the cream of the crop from the hundreds of heavens from the north. One could only imagine how much stress the River Tomb Academy was put under. Qin Mu's heart wavered slightly, and he walked towards the River Tomb Academy. Beside him, the river slowly rose up, and portions of water floated in the air, rising higher and higher. Gradually, the river's surface that was almost a dozen miles wide had flown up and floated into the air. Before River Tomb Academy, the River Tomb scholars and the Northern Heavens half-gods, gods, and devils all raised their heads up to look towards the magnificent sight before their eyes with dazed expressions. The Gold River had flown into the air, and within the river were numerous enormous fish several yards in length that were swimming in the air. They were lifted up by an invisible force as they swam towards the air. There were also sinister and fierce-looking river monsters and water demons who were now waving their limbs around, following the Gold River, and flying into the air. The huge cargo ships that were sailing on the Gold River were now also flying in the air. They continued to sail on the river's surface. The pill furnaces in the boats were still in operation, the turbines still turning. The divine arts practitioners who guarded the ships all came to the side of the ships, sticking their heads out to look downwards. Clearly, they also didn't know what had just happened. The four-armed half-god and the academician who were in combat previously were also lifted up by this force. The two of them were rolled up by the force and rendered immobile. They could only watch as the force restrained them, and they floated on the river surface involuntarily. The Gold River levitated at several hundred feet in the air, flying above the mountain peaks of the surrounding mountains of River Tomb Academy, and to a distance of several miles beyond. It drew an arc in the sky and then finally returned to the river path of Gold River, continuing to surge forwards. This sight made everyone feel their hearts palpitate. Is the God of eternal peace here? One of the gods from the heavens of the north raised his head to look at the sky, sneering. He has some abilities, but he's just a show-off. He retracted his gaze and looked forward. At the bottom of this breathtaking river, a youth was stepping on the air and walking towards River Tomb Academy in a leisurely manner. Behind this youth was a dragon Qilin and a water Qilin, and there was another youth with a chubby face who was looking around curiously. The sound of the waves and water flowing from the air could be heard distinctly. Although the footsteps of the youth walking in the front were slow, his speed wasn't slow. As he walked towards River Tomb Academy, the sky suddenly darkened ominously, and it continued to grow even darker. An imposing gate appeared behind the youth, growing more distinct. The huge gate of darkness then opened up, and the devil chi of Yudu surged outwards, dyeing the skies black. Disciples from the heavens of the north. The gate was like an enormous mouth that could swallow up heaven and earth, and from it came a blood-curdling voice that reverberated from heaven to earth. The sound waves crashed forwards, and the skin on the faces of the half-god divine arts practitioners from the northern heavens, who had stood at the front of the mountain gates, were creased up and blown backwards. There's not a single one who can fight. The sound waves surged forward again, everyone's hair flew about messily, and their clothes fluttered backwards. A few half-gods with lower levels of cultivation couldn't hold their ground and were flung into the air by the sound waves, falling backwards like windmills. The voice was filled with demonic aura. It was as if it could bring out the most terrifying feeling within one's heart. When the voice emerged, it made one feel like they had fallen into Yudu, and were continuously sinking into the darkness. The half-gods of the northern heavens were now sweating profusely, their legs trembling in fear. Suddenly, the apparition disappeared, and the Gold River split into two streams and descended gradually, flowing by the two sides of the River Tomb Academy. The darkness in the sky retreated in an instant and disappeared into the towering gate. The gate became faint and then disappeared completely. Very soon the skies became bright again. The youth had already reached the mountain gate before River Tomb Academy. He was all smiles, and he looked at the half-god divine arts practitioners by the mountain gate who had yet to recover from their shock with a small smile. A half-god god with a radiance in his eyes looked at the youth and shouted with rage. A god coming here and inciting trouble, intimidating the divine arts practitioners from the heavens of the north. Is this how eternal peace treats their guests? At this very moment, world-shaking laughter erupted from within River Tomb Academy. Scholars, follow me out of the academy to greet eternal peace's overlord Bodhichin. There was a commotion within the academy, and a white-haired old god with a radiant face led the thousands of scholars of River Tomb Academy out of the academy. The old god bowed, and his voice was like thunder, causing violent tremors in the Gold River as he said, Substitute Grand Chancellor of River Tomb Duke Wei, along with the scholars, are here to welcome eternal peace's overlord Bodhichin's arrival. The voices of the thousands of scholars were even louder than Duke Wei as they cried out in a world-shaking voice. We welcome eternal peace's overlord Bodhichin's arrival. Everyone straightened up and Duke Wei bowed again, smiling. Heavenly Saint Cult's Heavenly King Wei pays my respects to Cult Master Sacred Teacher. Qin Mu laughed out loud, holding onto his arms. His voice was a lot lower than Duke Wei's as he smiled and said, What Saint Woodcutter did, he didn't inform me of. That's why I have arrived a few days late. Duke, these few days must have inconvenienced you. From the heavens of the north, who are the ones who want to challenge me? Qin Mu looked around him, his gaze like lightning, and light emerged from his eyes. In this split second, the several miles around River Tomb Academy were lit up brightly. Only when Qin Mu retracted his gaze did everyone's vision return to normal. There was a sea of silence, and only the sounds of heavy breathing and teeth clattering could be heard. Not a single half-god divine arts practitioner dared to speak up. After quite some time, a bull-headed, human-bodied devil god from the northern heavens spoke in a solemn voice. Is the overlord body of eternal peace a god? That old fox Wenqianga didn't mention that the overlord body of eternal peace has already cultivated to the god realm. If you're a god, then we will naturally choose an expert of the god realm to challenge you. Qin Mu's aura was overwhelming. He opened his divine treasures for everyone to look at clearly, and he shook his head in reply. I've only just opened my 7th divine treasure recently. A formless aura shrouded River Tomb Academy like a suppressive dark cloud over a city, and at this moment, everyone felt a sense of breathlessness. It was as though a god had unrestrainedly released his imposing aura, and it was likely that even beyond thousands of miles, the terrifying pressure of his aura could still be felt. Luckily, Qin Mu didn't overdo it. After releasing some of his aura, he exercised restraint. Village chief and the others in the village had always reminded him to keep a low profile. If there was no special situation, he would normally not reveal his full abilities at the first moment. This time, I've only revealed 40% of my cultivation. It should be considered low-key enough. Qin Mu looked around his surroundings and was all smiles, thinking to himself, I've not laid out all my cards. I haven't taken off the willow leaf on the heart of my brows, and I haven't revealed my divine treasures of the devil path. The many devils and gods of the northern heavens frowned at this. Looking at the divine treasure apparitions floating behind Qin Mu, the corners of their eyes twitched. This person was truly too powerful, so powerful that he was almost inhuman, and unlike a divine arts practitioner. This sort of overbearing power wasn't the power of the path, skills, and divine arts, it was solely that of strong magic power. Qin Mu's magic power was on par with the gods who ascended the celestial palace and stood before the southern heavenly gates. And it was possibly even more powerful than theirs. Such formidable magic power led one to believe that if he walked through the southern heavenly gates, he would most likely be able to endure the pressure of it and become a real god directly. Why? Of course, the higher the level of cultivation, the greater the pressure to be endured when entering the southern heavenly gates. Therefore, they also felt it likely that when Qin Mu walked through the southern heavenly gates, it was possible that he would be crushed into pieces instead. What was more frightening was that Qin Mu's divine treasures were unique, and were actually connected as one. There were no barriers between the divine treasures. They were unable to make out his 7th divine treasure. They couldn't tell if it was the huge towering tree of the 6 directions land or the celestial river that flowed out of the celestial palace. What kind of freak is this? A few of the gods and devils looked at each other, thinking in unison. So this is the overlord body? The young experts from the northern heavens, despite being the cream of the crop who had been selected carefully, were still no match against such a terrifying fellow. However, Duke Wei understood Qin Mu's intentions. When Qin Mu arrived at River Tomb Academy, he had directly demonstrated his power by levitating over the Gold River, revealing his superb abilities. Based on Duke Wei's understanding of Qin Mu wasn't solely trying to show off his might as the overlord body, he was also trying to scare off a portion of the challengers. He didn't want to battle those of lesser ability. Although Qin Mu had always been kind and pleasant in his treatment of others, he was actually very arrogant. If one had a low level of cultivation and was of lesser ability, he wouldn't be interested in fighting them. However, looking at this situation, Cult Master isn't scaring off a portion of the challengers, he's scaring off all the young experts from the northern heavens. Duke Wei looked around his surroundings, thinking to himself, the young experts of the northern heavens may be strong, but they aren't strong beyond reasonable levels. Even if they all attacked at the same time, I fear it wouldn't take much time for them to be slaughtered by Cult Master. Ha ha ha! The overlord body of eternal peace truly lives up to its reputation. The devil god with the bull head suddenly laughed out loud, saying in a loud voice, Overlord Body Qin is truly exceptionally powerful. We, the envoys, have already seen what you can do. You have the right to compete with the northern heavens. We aren't here to challenge Overlord Body Qin, but instead, are here to deliver the letter of challenge. Having said that, the other gods and devils of the northern heavens revealed expressions of incomprehension. They had clearly thought of eternal peace as an easy target and had come forth to bully it and this overlord body of eternal peace, wanting to seize eternal peace as well while they were at it. Without changing his expression, the devil god with the bull head said with awe-inspiring righteousness, We previously witnessed the abilities of Eternal Peace's divine arts practitioners and were worried that the Overlord body would merely be of such standards. But now that we have seen what you can do, we feel that you are qualified to accept the letter of challenge from the Northern Heavens. The rest of the gods and devils came to a sudden realization. So this is what he meant. The divine arts practitioners that we brought are of no match for this fierce fellow. If we say we were actually only here to deliver the letter of challenge, we can still redeem our faces. The devil god with the bull head had a solemn expression as he continued with a deep voice. The Northern Heavens are unified under the name of Mahakala. Since Overlord Bodychin has the capabilities, then we invite Overlord Bodychin to head to the Northern Heavens. We will be waiting for your arrival there. The other gods and devils nodded their heads, exclaiming, "We await your arrival." Donghua asked curiously, "Where is your letter of challenge?" With his expression unchanged, the devil god with the bull head replied, "Eternal Peace is just a small country. There is no need for an actual letter of challenge. We are just delivering a message." Donghua smiled scornfully. The devil god was extremely thick-skinned, and he continued, "The letter of challenge has been delivered. We shall now return to the Northern Heavens. We hope that Overlord Bodychin comes soon. Let's go." He turned around, intending to lead the divine arts practitioners of the Northern Heavens to make their exit. "Hold on." Chinmu's voice rang out from behind them. The back muscles of the devil god with the bull head tensed up, and he hurriedly turned around just in case Chinmu sneaked up on him. Chinmu smiled pleasantly. "The seniors of the Northern Heavens have no etiquette. You say you are here to deliver a letter of challenge, yet you didn't deliver it. However, Eternal Peace cannot be as rude. I will have to reply with a letter of challenge. When you go back, let the heroes of the Northern Heavens take a look at it." The devil god was relieved, smiling. "Overlord Bodychin, please go ahead." "Eng." From within Chinmu's Taotai sack flew out Carefree Sword. Chinmu pressed his fingers together and pointed outwards, and Carefree Sword pierced into the sky with a chi sound. Chinmu moved his feet around, and his sword fingers changed in position, pointing about continuously. Carefree Sword moved about continuously as well, drawing in the air the figure of a high-spirited youth with a long sword on his back. Very soon, Chinmu had finished drawing this image with Carefree Sword. He had copied Def's painting of the sword god. However, the person drawn within wasn't village chief in his youth, it was Chinmu himself. "This is my letter of challenge." Chinmu gripped Carefree Sword. Gently shaking his hand, he cut out the image from the air. He pressed on it and the image was now half a foot long. Donghua ordered someone to bring an invitation card over. Chinmu placed the sword picture inside the card and said, "When you return, select young experts, and then open my letter of challenge. Also, those of low levels of cultivation must not look at the letter of challenge. When I sense that the sword picture within the letter of challenge has been destroyed, I will personally head to the Northern Heavens and pay each and every one a visit." He hesitated for a moment, then continued with great sincerity, "For the sake of your lives, you must not open this letter of challenge. Only when you have selected the strongest divine arts practitioners of each realm can you open it. In addition, outsiders must not see the contents of the letter of challenge, as it is very dangerous. Bear this in mind, bear this in mind. Everyone, you may go now." The devil god with the bull head had a grave expression. Taking the letter of challenge, he shouted, "Let's go." The gods and devils, along with the divine arts practitioners of the Northern Heavens, quickly took their leave. When they were far away from the River Tomb Academy, one of the divine arts practitioners asked, "Teacher, is this letter of challenge really so powerful? Could you open it to let us take a look?" The devil god with the bull head shook his head. "It must not be opened so lightly. The sword picture within the letter of challenge contains his divine arts. Once it's opened, it will trigger his divine arts." Another devil god laughed. "You're overstating it. The sword picture he drew, although it hides his divine arts within, if the divine arts burst out when it's merely opened once, won't the letter of challenge be destroyed? In my opinion, as long as we don't utilize our vital chi, then we won't trigger his divine arts. Opening it up to take a look wouldn't be much of an issue." The other gods and devils laughed in reply. "Know yourself and know your enemy so that you will be victorious in every battle." The devil god with the bull head hesitated for a while. Taking out the letter of challenge, he said, "You can take a look at it then. But there must not be any fluctuation of the vital chi, so as to not trigger his divine arts. I still need to take this letter of challenge to see Mahakala. Amongst our heavens, we don't have such a terrifying expert. Only under Mahakala are there powerful individuals who can be his match." He opened the letter of challenge carefully, and indeed, Qin Mu's divine arts didn't burst out. With a sigh of relief, he said, "You can come forward to look at it now." Everyone came forward, looking at the sword picture within the letter of challenge. Qin Mu had used Carefree Sword as a brush, drawing in the air and imprinting his sword techniques on it. To achieve this step, one would be required to have the abilities of a god. Only a god could imprint divine arts into space, letting it stay there for a very long time. Everyone came to view the sword picture. The Qin Mu within the picture looked exactly like a real person. It was three-dimensional and looked realistic and vivid. This overlord body of eternal peace is really a man of many talents. If he went to the streets to sell his paintings, he would definitely be very successful. Everyone laughed. The devil god with the bull head hurriedly exclaimed, "I didn't show you this to let you judge his drawing skills. It's to let you all look at the path of his sword techniques, so as to see his true skill level. Who knows, we might even be able to find his divine arts from this painting, so that we can find something to deal with him." Everyone was solemn now, looking to the picture carefully. Suddenly, a half-god cried out loudly. His aura exploded, and the sound of divine treasures opening rang out from his body. Both of his arms were outstretched as though trying to shield himself, and he cried out, "He's coming at me with his sword." The expression of the devil god with the bull head changed drastically. Just as he was about to block him to stop his vital chi's fluctuation from striking the letter of challenge, suddenly the heart of the brows of the half-god split open. His primordial spirit was slaughtered by a formless power. Instantly his soul dispersed and he died from this unnatural event. The bull-head devil god was taken aback by this. He went forward to inspect, only to see a wound the shape of a sword stab between the brows of the half-god. However, this force hadn't come from an external source, it came from inside of him. What kind of divine art is this? The moment he thought about it, another few half-god divine arts practitioners went into a frenzy, utilizing their spirit weapons to attack their surroundings as they cried out, "He's attacking me!" Before they could finish what they wanted to say, there were sharp noises that rang out from the bodies of these half-gods. There were numerous blood arrows shooting out from all over their bodies. Their bodies shook violently, and following that, their primordial spirits were destroyed, and they all collapsed. Don't look at the letter of challenge. The devil god with the bull head had a sudden realization, and he hurriedly closed the letter of challenge and put it away. However, it was too late. The divine arts practitioners that had followed them to eternal peace to challenge the overlord body had, one by one, as though falling into a state of insanity, started to attack their surroundings with divine arts and spirit weapons. It was like they were engaging in a death match with an invisible enemy. The other gods and devils quickly came forward and tried to control them. Yet despite being suppressed, these half-gods were still filled with thousands of holes. All of them had their primordial spirit destroyed, and they were all dying one by one. The devil god with the bull head, along with the rest of the gods and devils, all felt a chill in their spine. They looked around their surroundings in a daze, and at their feet was a ground covered with corpses. "Sinister!" A devil god cried out in a shrill voice. "This is goddamn sinister!" The other gods and devils were pale. Qin Mu hadn't fought these challengers from the start till the end. He merely demonstrated his powers before River Tomb Academy, intimidating the divine arts practitioners from the other heavens. Yet, although Qin Mu hadn't done anything, his letter of challenge had killed all of these divine arts practitioners. What's the reason for this? What divine art is this? One of the devil gods asked with a trembling voice. "Sword skill." The devil god with the bull head replied in a hoarse voice. "The sword skill to enter the path. When you see the sword skill, you will imprint his sword skills in your heart. This kind of sword skill is too sinister, it attacks your spirit and will. When your spirit and will crumble, it will steal your powers, and using your own powers, it will unleash the powers of the sword skills within your body." The spirit and the will of these practitioners couldn't defeat the will of the sword path, hidden within the picture. and that is why they died. We are beings of the God realm, so the will of the sword path within the picture didn't have any effect on us. A chill went down the spines of the many gods and devils. The bullhead devil god shouted out sternly, "Go! Let's go see Mahakala." The others followed after him hurriedly. One of the gods couldn't help himself and he asked, how could his sword picture hide such a terrifying will of the sword path? Could such a powerful will exist in this world? This isn't willpower, it's undying God consciousness. At the Mahakala Celestial Palace, darkness seeped out of this legendary palace, enshrouding its surroundings. However, inside it was brightly lit. The back of Mahakala's head had a black sun, and he sat upon the throne and opened up Chinmu's letter of challenge. Looking at it closely, he said in a leisurely manner, "This type of undying God consciousness came from the Crimson Light era. It's the technique of the first fake Emperor Crimson Emperor of the Crimson Light era. If you all don't recognize it, it's only natural. Even the celestial heavens didn't have the skills of Crimson Emperor. This sword picture isn't sinister at all. On the contrary, it's upright and magnificent. Apart from the undying God consciousness, there's still divine arts like the sword Tao in creation." Mahakala continued to inspect the sword picture with a smile of rumination on his face. Black aura entered and exited the black sun on the back of his head. The black aura was the source of the darkness that stretched for thousands of miles around Mahakala's surroundings. Yet what's peculiar is that beings of the God realm cannot trigger his undying God consciousness, nor sense his sword Tao in creation's level of cultivation. His divine art was only targeted at divine arts practitioners. We are unable to sense his paths, skills, and divine arts, and only looking at it with the naked eye would make it difficult for us to be able to comprehend the essence of his divine art. Mahakala revealed a smile that wasn't quite a smile and praised, "This overlord body of eternal peace definitely has some ability. Destroying his letter of challenge is easy, but to break through his divine art is very difficult." Within the palace of Mahakala, the gods of the northern heavens looked from one to another. At River Tomb Academy, Chinmu had used his sword as a brush and the air as paper to draw his sword picture and make his letter of challenge. Chinmu drew it in a relaxed and leisurely manner. Yet now that the sword picture was sent here, it made even the high and mighty gods feel extremely troubled. Go back to your own heavens and select the most outstanding divine arts practitioners. Their level of cultivation doesn't matter. Mahakala closed the letter of challenge, continuing, "Gather these people and send them here. The one and only condition for them to be sent here is that they have to have entered the path. If the young divine arts practitioners have yet to enter the path, sending them here will only result in their death." The gods of the northern heavens looked at each other uneasily, and one devil god exclaimed boldly, "It's extremely difficult to enter the path. We have over 300 heavens in the north, and each heaven has a population of over 1 billion. Yet, asking us to pick even one divine arts practitioner who has entered the path is truly making things difficult for us." Mahakala replied indifferently, "Why are there so many divine arts practitioners who have entered the path in eternal peace? This war." Mahakala stood up, and it was as though numerous threads had flown out of the black sun behind his head to connect to the darkness. As he walked, the black aura that surged out of the sun had a silk-like texture, tugging on the darkness to follow behind him and move as he moved. Eternal peace has experienced 800 years of war, and those who live on that small land have had no other choice but to attempt all methods to advance themselves. Their divine bridge was severed, so they wouldn't be able to ascend to the celestial palace. Thus, they could only seek breakthroughs from alternate avenues. Mahakala continued solemnly, "And war became the best melting pot for their breakthroughs. The heavens of the north have been peaceful and stable for far too long. It has made all these little fellows lead a befuddled existence, and resultantly, divine arts practitioners who have entered the path are few and far between. Let them fight and kill. As though rearing poisonous insects, put them inside a basin and let them kill each other until there's only 1 or 2 left. The last one standing would then be the most poisonous." The gods of the northern heavens felt chills down their spines. The devil god with the bull head spoke carefully, "Under Mahakala, there are many strong and powerful disciples." Mahakala gave him one look and seemed to laugh. "You all went behind my back and laid down the pact of Little Earth Count with Wentienga, that crafty heavenly master. Now that you cannot defeat him, you still want me to clean up after your mess. The ruler of the northern heavens, is it you all or me? Get lost and make an honest selection. 1 month later, I want to see the strongest poisonous insect that you have reared. The gods took their leave and returned to their own heavens. In hoarfrost heaven, there was an expanse of ice and snow, and within an enormous basin, there were numerous divine arts practitioners moving about stealthily, in hiding and engaging in fierce combat in this snow-covered world. What was initially a pleasing sight of snow was now a snowy sight riddled with plum blossoms like bloodstains. Snowflakes drifted down from the sky, gradually covering up the bloodstains. Apart from this ice valley, there were numerous others that similarly had divine arts practitioners in fierce combat. The divine arts practitioners within the same ice valley were all of the same realm. In an attempt to select the most outstanding divine arts practitioner, the gods of hoarfrost heaven had gathered tens of thousands of them together, letting them engage in internecine combat. It was similar to rearing poisonous insects and was solely for the goal of picking the strongest and most powerful divine arts practitioner and forcing them to enter the path through this life and death battle. This was merely a single heaven of the north. In the north of the primordial realm, there were over 300 heavens of varying sizes. Some had a huge population and some had a small population. The smallest still had a few billion, whereas the bigger ones could reach over a few hundred billion in population size. Within the period of a month, the divine arts practitioners of the few hundred heavens had suffered great casualties, but the results were striking as well. There were numerous powerful divine arts practitioners who had been selected from the process. Amongst them, there were about a dozen practitioners who had entered the path, and their abilities were formidable. The gods of the northern heavens brought their selected divine arts practitioners to Mahakala's celestial palace to see Mahakala as scheduled. The over 300 divine arts practitioners stood outside the palace in an orderly manner. They were all the elite of the elites, filled with murderous intent and fighting spirit, and they had incomparable confidence. There are still too many who have yet to enter the path. Mahakala didn't let them into the palace, he issued a decree instead. If we let these fellows view the letter of challenge from the overlord body of eternal peace, we will just make a fool of ourselves. Is it your intention to let the country bumpkins of eternal peace mock me? Let them continue to battle it out until only the ones who have entered the path remain. Even if we can only produce one more practitioner who has entered the path, it will be sufficient. The command was laid out outside the palace, and the 300-plus divine arts practitioners instantly burst into motion, their divine arts exploding as they lit up the surrounding darkness. With every bright ray of light that tore through the darkness, a divine arts practitioner collapsed and died. After a long while, Mahakala issued another decree from within the palace. Stop! The remaining divine arts practitioners stopped fighting and looked towards the brightly lit palace of Mahakala. There were only 17 people left now. They were the half-gods of half-gods, with incomparably formidable power from their bloodlines. They were also all experts who had entered the path, and they had unrivaled drive and a raging desire for battle. Mahakala! A devil god bowed and exclaimed out loud. Out of the 316 heavens of the north, and the thousands of billions of divine arts practitioners, we have selected 17 practitioners who have entered the path. A single selection process has resulted in millions of corpses. All this just to view the letter of challenge from the overlord body of eternal peace. Is it worth it? The millions of divine arts practitioners would have been able to raise eternal peace empire to the ground countless times. Ignorant fool! Mahakala's voice came from within the palace as he replied coldly, I am saving your lives. If you hadn't laid down the pact of Little Earth Count with Wentienga, obliterating eternal peace could be done with a snap of my fingers. However, now that you have laid down the pact of Little Earth Count with him, even if it were tens of millions of people, much less millions, they would still have to die. Within the palace, the darkness surged, and Mahakala walked towards them as the black sun on the back of his head tugged at the darkness. It swallowed up the flames of the furnaces that lined the two sides of the palace, and the furnaces could no longer emit any light. Earth Count was formed of the great Tao, and Little Earth Count is the son of Yudu. He has the power of the ancient gods and the capabilities of the life forms after the beginning. I am the first devil god born of Yudu who achieved the Tao, and I know very well how powerful the son of Yudu is. To make an oath to Little Earth count, you are all incredibly audacious. Mahakala took out Qin Mu's letter of challenge, and with a hard tug, he hung the letter in the air and yelled, "Look at it!" The 17 half-god divine arts practitioners all looked towards Qin Mu's letter of challenge. In the letter, Qin Mu wore a sword on his back, smiling at them silently. After a short period, the eyes of one of the divine arts practitioners who had entered the path bulged out, his body trembling vigorously. Suddenly he cried out loud. His body tore into several pieces, and he died from the unnatural cause. After another short while, another divine arts practitioner unsheathed his sword and waved it around. His sword techniques were like light and lightning, and he seemed almost berserk. Great sword technique. He suddenly retracted his sword and stood still, a ray of sword light shooting out from between his brows. There was a sword wound on the heart of his brows, and blood flowed out of it steadily. Another one had a steady aura that revolved around him fervently, while the strange sounds of a huge bell rang out incessantly. The runes around him transformed into an enormous bell, and the bell tremored continuously. His divine art was exquisite. Suddenly, blood rays emerged from within the bell, dyeing the entire bell that was formed of the runes red with blood. The bell dissipated, and the runes collapsed, leaving behind a corpse that was filled with thousands of holes. There were fewer and fewer practitioners left, and very soon, there were only 6 remaining from the 17. These 6 half-god divine arts practitioners had managed to block the undying god consciousness within Qin Mu's letter of challenge, and as though having just undergone great training and achieving realization, the 6 of them felt their spirits refreshed and full of vigor. Their abilities had undergone another huge advancement. Upon seeing this, the gods and devils of the various heavens all let out a sigh of relief. From our northern heavens, there are 6 who are able to rival this overlord body of eternal peace. At least we can still salvage some of our dignity. These 6 divine arts practitioners have aptitudes that surpass most, and their ability and comprehension is extraordinary. They were able to make use of the sword picture to advance themselves, and can finally face the challenge from the overlord body of eternal peace. After this battle, our northern heavens will have 6 more geniuses who will shock the world. The future achievements of these 6 will most definitely set the heavens on fire. At this very moment, Mahakala opened his mouth and spoke. This is the first stage of the overlord body of eternal peace's letter of challenges test. You have passed the first stage of the test. The gods and devils of the northern heavens were astonished, and Mahakala continued. When the sword picture within the letter of challenge has been destroyed, only then is it considered accepting the letter of challenge. This overlord body of eternal peace is considerably fair. The letter of challenge hides his consciousness, and whichever level of cultivation you are at, the sword god within the sword picture will then execute the corresponding level of cultivation to fight with you. Thus, you don't have to worry that he might bully you with a difference in realm. Now, Mahakala looked around, his gaze sweeping past the 6 divine arts practitioners who had entered the path, and he said coldly, "Come up one by one and use your own vital chi to trigger the letter of challenge." One of the divine arts practitioners came forward, triggering the sword picture with his vital chi. The Qin Mu within the sword picture unsheathed his sword, and in an instant sword rays filled the sky, and he pierced out of the picture. The divine arts practitioner roared out loud and executed his own divine art of the path. The 2 divine arts of the path crashed into each other, and the forces swept outwards in all directions, causing a violent wave that only subsided after a long time. Before the palace of Mahakala, the gods hurriedly came forward to look, only to see that divine arts practitioner standing there with an awe-inspiring presence, not moving at all. Suddenly, he fell backwards and took his last breath on the spot. The gods of the northern heavens felt the hairs on their backs stand up as they looked to the sword picture. The figure of Qin Mu within the sword picture was still incredibly distinct, looking vivid and realistic, and his sword was still in its sheath. Mahakala said coldly, "Next." Another divine arts practitioner who had entered the path came forward. This was a powerful individual who had entered the path with knife skills. He didn't use his vital chi to trigger the sword picture, and had directly pulled out his knife. He executed his ultimate skill of entering the path with the knife, cleaving down at the sword picture. There were knife lights and sword shadows that flashed by instantaneously, leaving behind only thin black lines in the air. They were the wounds of space caused by the sword skills and knife skills that had ripped into it. These thin black lines only disappeared after a while. The corners of the eyes of the half-god who had entered the path with knife skills trembled. He lowered his head to look down at his waist, and blood flowed out of his mouth. An extremely thin line of blood appeared at his waist. His upper body and lower body were gradually separating from each other. "You're quite good. You didn't die under his sword. You can be groomed further," Mahakala continued indifferently. Next, a god hurriedly came forward and carried the divine arts practitioner, helping him stop the bleeding. His legs and bottom fell to the ground, and the god quickly carried his lower body away as well, sending him for medical treatment. Another divine arts practitioner came up and faced Qin Mu's sword picture directly. His divine arts burst out with terrifying might. There were 2 more corpses on the ground, and another one was crippled. However, out of these 6 divine arts practitioners who had entered the path, there was a half-god youth who remained unscathed. He had warded off the attacks from Qin Mu's sword picture, and even managed to obliterate the sword picture with force. "What's your name?" Mahakala looked at the youth, revealing an expectant expression. The youth bowed and replied, "Disciple is a divine arts practitioner from Splendid Bloom Heavens. My surname is Feng and my name is Huayu. My ancestor is the 100 Flora ancient god." Mahakala nodded approvingly. "Your bloodline is extremely noble, your level of comprehension is also excellent, and your aptitude is outstanding. You could use the divine art of the path to go up against the attacks of his sword picture, and then obliterate the sword picture. This is no small matter. You entering the path through divine arts already means that you have abilities that are extremely rare to find in the primordial realm. However, to compete against the overlord body of eternal peace, you are still lacking in some areas." Feng Huayu's gaze flickered. He seemed to be reluctant to accept this opinion. However, there is a way to make up for it. Mahakala turned around and walked into the palace. "Follow me. The letter of challenge from the overlord body of eternal peace has been destroyed by you. He has already sensed it and at this moment has probably started to make his journey here. For him to reach this palace will take him at least 3 months. In these 3 months, I will impart to you my Emperor's Throne ultimate technique, the Dark Emoja Sutra. I will teach you personally, and within 3 months, it will allow your cultivation to improve tremendously." Feng Huayu was surprised and elated. He hurriedly followed Mahakala into the palace. "Send someone to invite Khan Rwandi over." Mahakala spoke in a low voice. Khan Rwandi once surrendered to eternal peace and learned the results of eternal peace's reforms. When he imparts the results of eternal peace's reforms to you, you will then be able to compete against the overlord body of eternal peace. Rwandi is my disciple now, and his abilities are already quite strong. He can definitely allow you to advance even further after you have cultivated my ultimate technique. At River Tomb Academy, Qin Mu had been studying in the academy all along, learning the reform results of River Tomb Academy diligently. Unknowingly, a month had since gone by. Qin Mu had finished his studies and was sparring with Duke Wei when all of a sudden, he sensed something in his heart. Qin Mu stopped what he was doing and smiled. "There's already a figure from the northern heavens who has accepted my letter of challenge. Heavenly King Wei, based on the agreement, I shall head there now." Duke Wei's heart jolted and he hurriedly said, "Cult Master, the heavens of the north are of the enemy's forces, and Mahakala is the ancestor of the devil path. Even martial arts heavenly teacher is no match for him. For your journey there, how many experts does Cult Master need to accompany you?" Qin Mu smiled. "Just the dragon Qilin is sufficient." Duke Wei's eyes widened, and his heart was full of anxiety. "How can you only bring along that glutton?" "Cult Master, please wait for a few days. I will get the cult disciples to look for the 4 great heavenly teachers and the 4 great heavenly kings to accompany and guard you." Qin Mu shook his head and laughed. Why would the overlord body of eternal peace require the guardianship of the heavenly teachers and heavenly kings of founding emperor? Wouldn't this destroy the name of eternal peace? "Take care of brother Yu first, let him study well, I shall go now." At this, Qin Mu ordered Yenner to stay behind to take care of Celestial Venerable Yu's daily needs. He called for the dragon Qilin and headed towards the north. Duke Wei was uneasy and immediately took out a mirror to contact Si Yunxiang. Cult Master is headed to the heavens of the north for his appointment. Quickly ask the 4 great heavenly kings and the 4 great heavenly teachers of founding emperor to head towards the northern heavens too. Si Yunxiang knew that this was of great urgency, and she immediately informed all the hall masters of heavenly saint cult to look for the whereabouts of the 4 great heavenly teachers and the 4 great heavenly kings. The dragon Qilan sprinted in the direction of the north while Qin Mu hid within the mirror to continue researching the ancient gods' runes and the imprints of the great Tao that Tao ancestor had given him in the Guardian Pavilion. Unknowingly, more than 2 months had gone by, and they arrived at the north of the primordial realm. In the sky, there were multicolored rays of light pulsating gently. These were the apparitions that were formed by the northern heavens that hung above the primordial realm. The dragon Qilan continued forwards. On this day, a huge mountain that was thousands of yards in height suddenly rumbled noisily, transforming into a mountain divine being. He questioned out loud with a voice that sounded like rolling thunder and lightning, "Is the one who comes forth Qin Mu of eternal peace, Overlord Body Qin?" The dragon Qilan stopped in his tracks and said, "Cult Master, a mountain god is calling for you." Qin Mu crawled out of the mirror, raising his head to look over. He bowed to pay his respects and smiled. "I am Qin Mu of eternal peace." The mountain god returned his respects, speaking in a muffled voice. "Overlord Body of eternal peace, Mahakala has issued an order. Overlord Body need not visit the heavens of the north. You may just head straight to the palace of Mahakala. The powerful individual of the northern heavens is awaiting your arrival in the palace." He raised an arm and pointed in the direction of the palace of Mahakala. "Overlord Body, please head in that direction." Qin Mu nodded gently. "Thanks for the trouble. Fatty Dragon, change your course for the palace of Mahakala." The dragon Qilan hurriedly changed his course of direction. After walking for 2 days, they saw that up ahead, darkness had enshrouded the whole area. Even sunlight was unable to shine in. In the darkness on the peak of an enormous mountain, a devil god of 10,000 yards spread his wings like a huge bird, shouting out, "Is the one who comes forth Qin Mu of eternal peace, Overlord Body Qin?" The dragon Qilan stopped walking, and Qin Mu raised his head with a smile. "It is I. This is the territory of the palace of Mahakala." The devil god with the head of a bird shouted out again, "Mahakala was afraid that you wouldn't know the way and ordered me to wait here so as to point out the path for you. Much thanks." Qin Mu bowed and ordered the dragon Qilan to continue moving forward. They hadn't walked far when they saw a divine glow piercing the heavens. There was a divine being standing tall in the darkness, and he called out, "Overlord Body Qin of eternal peace, Mahakala ordered me to point you the way from here." Qin Mu expressed his thanks. After another few miles, there was another devil god with flames blazing around his body. He shouted out, "Overlord Body of eternal peace, please come this way." As the dragon Qilan continued forwards, there were actually 100,000 devil gods welcoming them along the way. They lined from the edge of the darkness all the way to the front of the palace of Mahakala. This sight made the dragon Qilan's heart thump wildly. Mahakala ruled the 316 heavens of the north, and the 100,000 elite devil gods under him were now lined up along the path to welcome them. This scene frightened the dragon Qilan, and he wanted nothing more than to take to his heels and escape. Qin Mu remained indifferent, and he ordered the dragon Qilan to continue moving forward. When they reached the front of the palace of Mahakala, they saw innumerous gods and devils with their auras bursting out, and there were apparitions in the thousands. There were quite a few devil gods of the Jade Pavilion, Jade Capital, and Numinous Sky Realm. In the sky, their apparitions formed different celestial palaces that were towering above. The bodies of the various gods and devils stood tall atop the mountains while their primordial spirits sat in their respective celestial palaces. The skills of these gods and devils were unnaturally powerful. It was a spectacle of gods and devils dancing. The palace of Mahakala sat in the midst of all the apparitions. There was a narrow laddered path that led straight to the palace and to the brightly lit main hall. The dragon Qilan's heart palpitated as he carried Qin Mu and climbed up the stone steps. He forced himself to make his way to the palace of Mahakala, and on both sides of the pathway were the menacing-looking gods and devils of the northern heavens. Qin Mu stood on his forehead, his expression indifferent. The dragon Qilin finally reached the peak of the mountain and came before the palace of Mahakala. At the front of the palace, the flames were like torches. At the back of the palace, in the darkness, one could actually faintly see the texture of the mountains of the giant stars. It was indescribably frightening. Qin Mu paid no attention to the apparitions that surrounded him, speaking loudly, "Overlord body of eternal peace, Qin Mu is here to meet the hero of the northern heavens. Dare you enlighten me?" The door of the palace opened widely, and a figure with a giant black sun floating behind his head could be indistinctly seen sitting within. "Feng Huayu, the overlord body has arrived." The voice of the figure rang out, speaking at a normal pace. "After 3 months of cultivating, you are no longer what you were before. Now are you confident?" "I am." The voice that came from within the palace was like thunder. "Go forth." Qin Mu's gaze landed on the figure that emerged from the palace. It was a youth that walked out of the palace of Mahakala, and the fragrance of flowers greeted Qin Mu's nostrils. "Divine arts practitioner of splendid bloom heavens, Feng Huayu." The youth bowed. Qin Mu walked down from the dragon Qilin's head, smiling slightly. "Overlord body of eternal peace, Qin Mu. Please, please." Feng Huayu's aura exploded. Shifting his body, he leaped at Qin Mu, and rays that filled the sky surged around. Qin Mu gripped his sword pellet, his body trembled, and he transformed into a 3-headed, 6-limbed form. His sword flashes were filled with magnificent rays in that instant. The brilliant rays shifted, and the sword flashes moved while the fishes and dragons danced before the palace of Mahakala. The humming of the sword was incredibly crisp and clear. Suddenly, the sword flashes vanished. Various types of flourishing blossoms that surpassed brocades rained down from the sky. All around the palace of Mahakala, the gods and devils raised their heads to look up. The flourishing blossoms were of poignant beauty as they descended from the darkness above, ever increasing in number. The flower petals drifted down, and as though it had just rained flowers, there was a deluge of heavenly flowers. The flower petals descended, collecting more and more, burying the corpse of Feng Huayu within. The youth from splendid bloom heavens had already been buried halfway by the flower petals. Qin Mu retracted his sword, bowing to pay his respects to that existence that sat unmoving in the palace of Mahakala. He then turned around and walked to the dragon Qilin. Qin Mu sat on the dragon Qilin's big head and said indifferently, "Fatty dragon, we can go back now." The dragon Qilin really wanted to be as calm and composed as Qin Mu, to adjust and turn his body around in a carefree manner, smacking his own bottom with his tail, and leisurely stroll out of this place. However, the dragon Qilin's 4 legs were quivering, and his tail was starting to be not of his own. Normally he could whip his tail up with ease, but now his dragon tail was a little numb, and only half of it could be raised up. The other half of it drooped on the ground. The dragon Qilin took 3 months to carry Qin Mu over, making the long journey by foot from River Tomb to this place. He had only just found his footing, and now everything was already over. Only, was it really possible for them to return home just like this? The dragon Qilin's legs were still weak, and there was a silence permeating the surroundings. It was incredibly stifling. The gods and devils that surrounded the palace of Mahakala were high and mighty, their corporeal bodies and faces radiating divine rays in the darkness. Only the sound of heavy breathing could be heard, and no one spoke up. The dragon Qilin finally turned himself around, doing his best to tell himself to be stable, and not to take an infirm step and end up rolling down the mountain from the palace of Mahakala. Despite this, he was unsure if he could even prevent that from happening. On the 2 sides of the stone pathway were the huge corporeal bodies of the gods and devils. They looked as though they were carved from meteorites. Their forms and bodies were grotesque, and their faces were even more sinister looking. They stared at Qin Mu and the dragon Qilin with fierce expressions. The dragon Qilin lifted his feet and was about to walk down the stone steps. Or possibly roll down, he thought to himself. At this moment, smoke spewed out of the nostrils of a devil god that was standing on the dragon Qilin's left side. The devil god's huge palm reached towards the devil god weapon that was at his waist. The other gods and devils all made their own moves as well. The tremoring sound of divine weapons and devil god weapons could be heard. The dragon Qilin finally composed himself, the muscles all over his body gradually tightening as he prepared to rush out of this place with explosive might whenever the time came. Just previously, the dragon Qilin was feeling a little anxious, yet now that he had to fight for his life, he no longer had any other thoughts. If they wanted to escape, he would have to put his whole heart into escaping. On this matter he was adept. At this very moment, a voice emerged from the palace of Mahakala. "Hold on." Upon hearing this, the gods and devils of the northern heavens successively lowered their palms. Qin Mu pat the dragon Qilin on the forehead. Instantly, the dragon Qilin understood his intentions, and he stopped in his tracks, turning around. Qin Mu looked straight at the ancestor of the devil path who sat within the palace. In the palace, Mahakala stood up and said, "Overlord Body of eternal peace truly lives up to his reputation. The northern heavens have suffered an overwhelming defeat. You have won fair and square." Qin Mu revealed a smile. "The gods of the northern heavens have laid down the pact of Little Earth Count with Heavenly Teacher Woodcutter and Heavenly Teacher Zishi. If they went back on their word and tried to kill me, they would have already become corpses at this moment." The gods and devils that surrounded the palace of Mahakala started to yell angrily one after the other, asking him to shut up. Mahakala's expression darkened and he spoke coldly, "You're the ones who should shut up." His voice forced the angry yelling and scolding sounds of these gods and devils down directly. They weren't able to say anything to that. Mahakala slowly moved forward. The black sun behind him followed along, swallowing up all the lights within the palace. Very soon, he was at the front of the palace. Qin Mu looked at this ancestor of the devil path carefully. He had heard stories regarding Mahakala's origins. It was rumored that Mahakala was the first devil god born of Yudu. Yudu was the place where the dead went after death, so when death existed in this world, Yudu was also born. Earth Count carried the great Tao of heaven and earth and was thus born. He was in charge of death, punishing evil and rewarding the good. However, even Earth Count had to follow the law of Yudu, and he couldn't do things purely based on his own judgment. As more and more souls came to be within Yudu, negative emotions like the resentful thoughts and greedy thoughts of the dead began to give rise to the horrifying demonic nature of Yudu. There were also incomplete broken souls and spirits that wandered about the dark within Yudu, and thus the demonic nature of Yudu grew exponentially day by day. Yudu monsters were born from such fate. These monsters didn't have much consciousness and were formed from the filthiest and most vile thoughts that had merged with the devil chi of Yudu. These monsters cannibalized each other, eventually becoming devil gods. Mahakala was a devil god that was born of this. He was the first devil god of Yudu, and like the son of Yudu, he too had something extraordinarily special. He was born before Dragon Han, with the Dragon Han celestial heavens having yet been built then. It was still an extremely ancient and uncivilized era. After the appearance of Mahakala, then there was the devil race. There were also some who said that in its true sense, the devil race was actually the daughter of Earth Count. The devil race that was known in the world was merely a fake devil race. However, there weren't many who held this perspective. The devil race venerated him as the ancestor of the devil path, the ancestor of the thousands of devils, the ruler of the devil race. In actuality, the real first ancestor of the devil path and of the devil race should be Earth Count. However, Earth Count had few descendants, and thus the devil race was, in fact, created by Mahakala and the successive generations of devil gods who were later born of Yudu. There wasn't much relation with Earth Count. Mahakala was the first devil god born of Yudu, so it was only natural for him to be revered by the devil race to such an extent. Qin Mu noticed that Mahakala actually shared some similar physical attributes to Earth Count. He too had two curved and long bull horns. However, because he didn't turn around, Qin Mu couldn't tell if he too had a bull's tail like Earth Count. "You're all audacious." Mahakala looked around, feeling a bit pained. Laying down the pact of Little Earth Count and still intending to not honor it, "You're truly audacious. Do you all not know that when Tienga is one of the four great heavenly teachers of Founding Emperor, and has the nickname Sleazy One? If he proposes a gamble, you directly reject it so that you won't lose. If you accept it, you'll definitely lose. You were all scheming against eternal peace, thinking that it was easily obtainable, but he was also scheming against the northern heavens. What should I do about it?" Around the palace of Mahakala was nothing but absolute silence. Mahakala sighed. The 316 heavens of the north were painstakingly conquered by the soldiers under me. Yet, just because you were greedy for a momentary gain, we will have to give up the northern heavens to another. Sleazy One truly has great strategies. Can we break the pact? A devil god asked in a quavering voice. Mahakala glanced at him, and the devil god's face turned ashen. Breaking the pact means facing Little Earth Count directly. Mahakala continued indifferently. Although I'm not afraid of him, breaking the pact would definitely ruin my reputation and honor. I would be mocked for being untrustworthy. From the ancient and uncivilized era until now, the devil race grew stronger day by day under my rule. Yet the devil race ultimately still cannot achieve meteoric success. In hindsight, it's probably due to the fact that I used to be too cunning in the past, always going back on my words. Now that I'm successful, I should make some changes. His gaze landed on Qin Mu. Smiling slightly, he said, "Overlord Body of Eternal Peace, do you dare to accept my offer for a gamble?" Qin Mu looked up at this high and mighty Emperor's throne powerful being and probed. "If I don't accept Mahakala's gamble, what will you do?" "I definitely cannot give up my 316 heavens of the north. I will just have to let Little Earth Count eat them." Mahakala continued resolutely. "Throwing away the lives of these fools, I can still groom other gods and devils to rule the heavens." Qin Mu revealed a smile. "If I were you, I would do that too. These rulers of the various heavens, they are just servants who help Mahakala guard the heavens. If they die, they die. It's the population that's the most important. Only with such a massive population can there be endless geniuses born of it, and you will be able to groom even more powerful individuals. That way, Mahakala's rule will be stable." Mahakala laughed. "So, are you going to accept it?" Qin Mu replied calmly. "What would Mahakala like to bet on?" "Bet on me not breaking the pact. If you win, the 316 heavens will belong to eternal peace." Mahakala continued. "If I win, the previous pact will be nullified." Qin Mu broke out in laughter. "I won't gamble with you." Mahakala frowned. "Why not? When I win, if Mahakala wants to break the pact, you will still do it without hesitation. If I lose, then the favorable circumstance that the two great heavenly teachers fought for will achieve nothing." Qin Mu laughed. The 316 heavens, compared against the reputation of Mahakala, which is more important? Mahakala stared at him, and after a while he replied, "The 316 heavens are more important. My reputation is worth nothing. In the last millions of years, I have long lost all my reputation." Qin Mu was full of smiles. "That's why I'm not gambling." Mahakala's brow furrowed deeply. Suddenly, he asked in a polite manner, "Dare I ask who your teacher is?" Qin Mu replied with a straight face, "Sleazy One." Mahakala's expression changed slightly, and he laughed out loud. "It really is him. No wonder you could see through my little trick. Since this is how it's going to be, then we'll change what we bet. We'll bet on your life." He continued indifferently. "When you win, I'll let you walk out alive in the 1,000 of miles surrounding the palace of Mahakala. Beyond this boundary, I'll allow any of the gods and devils to come after you. If you lose, then you'll die together with all the rulers of my 316 heavens." As he said this, the expressions of the various rulers of heavens changed in unison. Mahakala was ruthless and decisive, and he bore a grudge against them for laying down the pact of Little Earth Count with Wentenga without informing him prior. Now it seemed he was determined to use their lives to break the pact of Little Earth Count. Qin Mu stayed silent. Looking around him, he couldn't see what there was in the dark. Mahakala laughed. "Are you looking for Wentenga, that old sleaze? They haven't entered the boundaries of the palace of Mahakala. If they step into the darkness, I'll sense it." Qin Mu broke into a smile. "Has Mahakala decided to deal with me personally?" Mahakala shook his head. "Logically, I should deal with you myself. However, I still want some face. The one who will deal with you will only be selected from my disciples or those who are no older than you are. You don't have to worry." Qin Mu let out a breath of air, replying solemnly, "Then Mahakala, please lay your terms." Mahakala laughed out loud, sweeping his sleeve and turning around. He said in a loud and clear voice, "Straightforward. Overlord Body of Eternal Peace, please wait for a few days. You can also stay to see the elites within my palace." Qin Mu walked down from the dragon Qilin's head, following him into the palace. He smiled. Mahakala, you are my senior. Mahakala shook his head. Senior, I'm not your senior. Your origins, I already know of it. You probably still don't know that the 4 great provincial governors of Yudu are all my juniors. Qin Mu's heart jumped and he narrowed his eyes. So that also means that Mahakala knows my identity as the son of Yudu. So why must he insist on gambling with me? The dragon Qilan followed behind him anxiously, looking to the 2 sides of the palace cautiously. He saw the lights waning, and there seemed to be countless monsters hiding amongst the shadows. I will give you extra food later, Qin Mu said. The timidness within the dragon Qilan's heart immediately vanished. He was now filled with courage. Raising his head up high and lifting his chest, he walked forward with broad steps in an awe-inspiring presence. Mahakala called for a demoness and gave his order, saying, "Let Overlord Body stay behind the palace. You must treat him well." The demoness complied, leading Qin Mu to the back of the palace and arranging a room for him. With a tender gaze, she said, "Young Master Qin is an honored guest. If you have any needs, you can always give me the order. I can do anything." She was good-looking, her eyebrows like silk, and her gaze was somewhat fervent. Qin Mu's eyes lit up. "Sister can do anything?" The demoness blushed bashfully, nodding her head gently. Qin Mu handed her a prescription. "Sister, help me to refine a few hundred batches of spirit pills. Fatty dragon, you're in for a treat." Mu stayed within the palace of Mahakala at ease. He spent the days either cultivating or wandering around leisurely. It was very relaxing. He didn't seem to have any guardedness against Mahakala or the terrifying and sinister palace. The lights were brightly lit within the palace of Mahakala, but outside of it was entirely dark. It was as though all light had been devoured by the darkness. One couldn't see much beyond. Qin Mu had walked out of the palace several times, and no one had stopped him. However, after walking into the middle of the darkness, Qin Mu would quickly turn around to return on his own, all smiles, seeming to be very happy. Only the dragon Qilan was very unhappy. He was very stern with the demoness who refined his spirit pills, criticizing the spirit pills' taste and flavor, the purity of the spirit medicine, and the methods she used to refine. He was very picky. Finally, after being scolded to tears more than a dozen times, the demoness could no longer bear it, and she ran away crying with her face in her hands. "Cult Master, this girl has a bad attitude." The dragon Qilan ate the spirit pills and continued, "She will do anything, but she can't do anything. She can't even refine spirit pills well." Qin Mu pinched a spirit pill over and tasted it, nodding in reply. Her method of refining pills isn't right. She didn't purify the spirit medicine. Even areas like control of fire, timing, and portioning have some small problems. This resulted in the marginal differences in taste, flavor, and medicinal effects. The dragon Qilan felt very well understood, replying, "She made a mistake, yet she still has the face to cry. How shameless." At this very moment, a voice came from outside yelling in rage. "Who dares to bully my cousin? Don't cry, cousin. I'll go beat the fellow to death to avenge you." Qin Mu smiled. "Trouble is here." The dragon Qilan was puzzled. "Cult Master, what do you mean?" The demoness who had been chided till she cried came towards them, bringing a youth from the demon race with her. She pointed towards Qin Mu, and with a choked voice she said, "It's him." The youth from the demon race looked to Qin Mu. Laughing coldly, he said, "You bullied my cousin? Even if you're the guest of my master Mahakala, I cannot tolerate you. I must bring you to justice today." Qin Mu ignored him, turning to the dragon Qilan to explain. "Mahakala hasn't done anything in the past few days. He made me stay in the palace wanting to gamble with me. However, he really doesn't have the confidence that he can beat me. Even with the disciples that he groomed and promoted personally, he has no certainty that they will be able to defeat me. Thus, he needs to stir up some trouble." The dragon Qilan still didn't fully understand. Qin Mu laughed. "If a disciple takes the initiative, finding an excuse to challenge me, then this challenge won't be counted in the gamble. Even if his disciple dies in my hands, it won't count as a loss for him in our gamble. Furthermore, his other disciples will be able to take the opportunity and view the fight, observing my paths, skills, and divine arts from afar so as to find a way to counter me." The dragon Qilan suddenly came to a realization. and the demon race youth who had rushed in with a formidable presence was also astonished. The dragon Qilin glanced at the youth, replying, "Then, cult master, the first of Mahakala's disciples who comes to stir up trouble, what will be his fate?" Qin Mu sighed. "He will be made to come and receive death by his senior and junior brothers." The expression on the demon race youth's face changed dramatically, and he clenched his fists tightly. Qin Mu continued indifferently, "When he's dead, his senior and junior brothers will have observed some of my divine arts, and after studying it, they will send out the next one to die. He will use the techniques they have researched to continue to challenge me." The dragon Qilin asked curiously, "Cult master, what happens after?" Qin Mu continued leisurely, "Then the second one will die. He will be killed easily using the flaws that were left behind purposely when I killed the first challenger. When I kill the first challenger, I will purposely leave some loopholes behind. They will study my loopholes, and thus the second one will be killed in a much simpler manner." The youth was pale now and he looked lost. He turned around to look behind him helplessly, unsure if he should still follow the plan and continue challenging Qin Mu. The dragon Qilin ate his spirit pills and replied, "So will cult master really kill the disciples of Mahakala within the palace of Mahakala? Some people always imagine me to be too merciful. They see me as the cult master of the heavenly saint cult, yet they don't realize that the heavenly saint cult is also the heavenly devil cult." Qin Mu smiled slightly. "A single letter of challenge of mine was sent to the northern heavens. To solve the letter, I'm not sure how many divine arts practitioners of the northern heavens have died, but surely the disciples of Mahakala should be aware. So many divine arts practitioners have already died because of my single letter of challenge. Thus, if I personally kill a few of Mahakala's disciples, can I still be considered vicious?" The devil race youth turned ashen, and he looked at Qin Mu as though he was looking at a horrifying devil king that was choosing his prey. The youth had come with great aggression, yet at this instant, he no longer had any desire to battle. To be able to become a disciple of Mahakala, one would naturally have to be a youth with the most outstanding aptitudes selected from the hundreds and thousands of others within the northern heavens. He would have to go through numerous life and death trials and tribulations, stepping on the innumerous corpses of his peers. Only then could he be highly regarded by Mahakala. Thus, the abilities of every disciple of Mahakala were even more formidable than that of Feng Huayu. They were all extraordinary and outstanding in their own way, and they were extremely confident and arrogant. Yet, at this moment, the arrogance and confidence of this demon race youth had vanished, leaving behind only fear, loss, and helplessness. He felt that he was like a newly born little lamb, and that Qin Mu was a menacing and vicious black dragon preying on him. In the dark, thunder and lightning crossed as heavy rain poured down, drenching the youth with penetrating coldness. At any time, he could possibly become the appetizer of this vicious dragon. Qin Mu spoke in a leisurely manner. "This senior brother, aren't you here to lead the way?" The face of the youth was now twisted, his body trembling. Qin Mu gave him a look. "How indecisive, you're making it difficult for me." The youth was drenched in perspiration. He suddenly raised his head and gritted his teeth. "If I leave, my Tao heart will be finished. My teacher Mahakala will also kick me out of the sect. I will never be able to raise my head again in the northern heavens, and my entire life will be destroyed." His voice was hoarse and he hissed, "So I must fight. Even if I'll die, I must fight. Only through this can I stabilize my Tao heart and stabilize my position within the northern heavens, and not be ridiculed by others. Only if I can withstand your attacks can I continue to move forward with determination." Qin Mu revealed an expression of admiration. "What's your name?" The devil race youth replied, "Emo Santong." Qin Mu nodded and asked, "Emo Santong, what are you most competent in? What did you use to enter the path?" Emo Santong was stumped for a while, replying, "I followed teacher Mahakala in cultivating the Dark Emoja Sutra, comprehending Mahakala's fighting techniques, and entered the path with divine arts. Then I followed senior brother Wandi in researching the results of the reforms of eternal peace, so I have some understanding of the eternal peace reforms. Dark Emoja Sutra, Mahakala's fighting techniques, entering the path with divine arts." Qin Mu laughed. "It's already not too bad. I didn't enter the path with divine arts myself. It's very difficult to accomplish. At the moment, I have only succeeded in entering the path with sword skills and martial arts. However, the eternal peace reforms that Conrwandi learned are far too old, the reform results that he guided you with are long obsolete. Execute everything that you have learned and attack me. I will block them with divine arts. I admire you greatly. After you survive, go back and answer to your senior and junior brothers. Emo Santong's eyes lit up, his aura bursting out. Behind him, numerous demonic wheels emerged, floating upright. His primordial spirit appeared at the front of the enormous demon wheel, gradually standing up, becoming more and more imposing. This was a primordial spirit with the form of a fat devil god. He had 4 arms with 4 pairs of eyes across his forehead in one straight line. Numerous ribbons formed of Yudu runes fluttered about in all directions. Using his primordial spirit to execute his divine arts while still being able to unleash the power of the divine arts to the extreme, it seemed that on entering the path through divine arts and unleashing his primordial spirit, the youth had extraordinary levels of attainments. Emo Santong gave a loud roar, and the 4-armed and 8-eyed devil god primordial spirit executed Mahakala's fighting technique and attacked Qin Mu. At this instant, the power of the Dark Emoja Sutra was demonstrated without restraint. The Devil Path divine art was already unpredictably strange, yet the Dark Emoja Sutra actually had a powerful and magnificent side. The 4-armed 8-eyed devil god primordial spirit utilized his divine art. It was numerous demonic wheels rolling at Qin Mu following the movements of his 4 arms. In addition to that, within the 8 eyes of the devil god primordial spirit, there were also numerous demon wheels that flew at Qin Mu. There were incredibly complicated Yudu runes within these demon wheels, and the power hidden within them were extremely horrifying. Qin Mu raised his arm. The divine art he executed was the great divine art of magnetism that Granny C had founded. Behind and in front of him, the galaxy surrounded him, and the magnetic force exploded, colliding into Qin Mu. Qin Mu hadn't entered the path with divine arts, but Granny C was a great expert who had entered the path through the divine art. He merely learned the great divine art that Granny C had used to enter the path, executing it with ease. Storms brewed instantly within the courtyard of the palace of Mahakala. Within the storm, Emo Santong flew backwards, slamming hard into a thick and enormous pillar. Following immediately was the sound of a loud crash. Emo Santong was crushed until he was lying flat on the ground, and a huge hole that spanned several yards in radius and depth suddenly emerged in the ground. The power contained within the magnetism divine art could distort space. It stretched out and squashed flat his corporeal body and primordial spirit at random. The different forces interchanged about instantaneously countless times. It was unusually unbearable for Emo Santong, who was at the bottom of the pit, and he was almost torn apart. Qin Mu dispersed his divine art, and the galaxy that surrounded him vanished as well. Striding towards the huge pit, he said, "My divine arts aren't as exquisite as yours. I'm just many times stronger than you in terms of magic power. However, because you entered the path through divine arts, it's difficult for me to kill you using a divine art. Now, you can go back and answer to your senior and junior brothers." Emo Santong stood up with great difficulty. Walking out of the pit, he bowed towards Qin Mu. Qin Mu returned his respects slightly. "You lack a little in your Yudu runes, so you're unable to fully execute the power of Yudu's great Dao runes." Emo Santong was initially about to take his leave, but upon hearing this, he jolted slightly and bowed towards Qin Mu. "Dare I invite the Overlord body to enlighten me?" Qin Mu replied gladly, "It's not a big deal for me to guide you. Execute your devil god primordial spirit again, and utilize Mahakala's fighting techniques." Emo Santong did as he was told. Qin Mu came to the side of his primordial spirit, plucking out several dozen great Dao runes from the demonic wheels. Qin Mu's mind shifted, transforming his own vital qi into devil vital qi. Then, he tweaked the structure of these great Dao runes. He turned to Emo Santong and said, "Try executing your great divine art again." Emo Santong executed Mahakala's fighting techniques, and instantly felt as though the power of his great divine art had actually increased by 20 to 30%. He was astonished and delighted, and he quickly sought guidance, asking, "Dare I ask, Overlord Body, why did you make such changes?" Qin Mu looked around. Noticing that it was a mess, he smiled and said, "It's too chaotic here. Let's find a cleaner place to talk it through slowly. Mo Santong walked with him into a pavilion within the palace. Mo Santong wanted to execute his Mahakala fighting techniques again, but due to his lack of cultivation, he was unable to do it. Qin Mu refined a cauldron of demonic vitality pills for him and said, "After you take this, utilize the Dark Emoja Sutra. It will help you recover your cultivation quickly." Mo Santong did what he was told, and indeed, his cultivation was quickly restored. He was full of admiration for Qin Mu. Qin Mu guided him on Yudu's great Dao runes, and Mo Santong felt that every word he said was as valuable as a pearl. His admiration for Qin Mu grew even more. He brought up all the problems he had faced in cultivation, and Qin Mu thought about them quickly and easily gave him solutions. Mo Santong was completely in awe of him. The two of them conversed for half a day, and Mo Santong was long won over. He stood up and bowed towards Qin Mu. "Your great reputation is truly justified. Overlord Bodychin is knowledgeable beyond measure. I'm completely convinced." Qin Mu quickly grabbed him up, smiling as he said, "I have to thank you as well. You can go back to see your senior and junior brothers now." Mo Santong was bewildered, but he felt that he shouldn't probe, so he turned to take his leave. Traveling through several long corridors, Mo Santong was quickly stopped by some of his senior and junior brothers. He quickly said, "He guided me for half a day, and my divine art is even more perfect now than it was before." After a short while, a voice filled with rage could be heard, and it yelled out, "Overlord Bodychin of Eternal Peace, you bullied my junior brother. I'm here to seek revenge for him." Qin Mu stood up, smiling as he said, "May I ask who you are?" The tall and sturdy being from the demon race that had rushed over with wide steps placed his hands on his hips, sneering, "Disciple of Mahakala, Xue Taidu." Qin Mu smiled slightly. "Brother Xue, what did you enter the path with?" Xue Taidu replied coldly, "I entered the path with the demon knife." Qin Mu revealed a troubled expression. "I haven't entered the path with knife skills. How about this? Brother Xue can execute the divine art you used to enter the path, and I will retaliate with knife techniques." Xue Taidu looked at him with widened eyes, suddenly breaking into a huge smile. "After you defeat me, will you also guide me a little?" In the main hall of the palace of Mahakala, Mahakala sat in the main seat, drinking tea leisurely. The loud noises of divine arts bursting out intermittently could be heard by his ears. In front of him, an enormous black pool appeared. The pool was like a mirror, and it revealed the exact scene of Qin Mu fighting his disciple with absolute clarity. The viewing angle could also be adjusted such that he was able to observe every single side of Qin Mu's divine arts. "Mahakala, even though he's guiding your disciples, in reality, he's learning your Dark Emoja Sutra in secret." Suddenly, a young-sounding voice laughed out. "It can't be that you really can't tell?" Mahakala put down his teacup, frowning slightly, the darkness in his eyes brewing. "We are trying to see his paths, skills, and divine arts. Yet he's trying to learn my ultimate art from my disciples. Can there really be an overlord body in the world?" Regarding the overlord body, it has long been spoken of. The youthful voice in the dark drew closer. Back in the first year of Dragon Han, there were already rumors of the overlord body. This overlord Bodychin is truly very formidable. These disciples of yours have gotten his guidance, but he will also quickly figure out your Dark Emoja Sutra. Mahakala gave a smile that wasn't quite a smile, replying, "Yet, he thinks that I'm using my disciples to deal with him. He doesn't realize that it is, in fact, you that I will be using to deal with him. His scheming against my Emoja Sutra is just a waste of his efforts. He has actually just helped me to guide my disciples." The young man walked out of the darkness completely and looked at the figure of Qin Mu within the black pool with interest, smiling. "You are old and scheming. That's why you could survive from the ancient era until now." His face was lit up, and he looked exactly like Celestial Venerable Yu Lan Yuqian, just marginally thinner. This Celestial Venerable Yu laughed. "If you let him continue to play, your Emoja Sutra will be completely revealed to him. If that happens, your Emoja Sutra will be worthless." Mahakala called for someone to come, giving his orders in a hushed tone, and the person hurriedly took his leave. "You searched about for the Emperor's throne technique. Didn't you long want to obtain my Emoja Sutra?" Mahakala smiled. "This is an opportunity for you. If you defeat him, I'll give you my Emoja Sutra. That celestial venerable you stared at the Qinmu within the black pool. There was no one around Qinmu now. Within the black pool, Qinmu was actually executing the dark Emoja Sutra, and there were numerous black wheels spinning around behind him. Following that, the black wheels became more and more concentrated, and they actually transformed into a huge black sun, looking similar to Mahakala's own black sun. Even the skin on Mahakala's face started to twitch uncontrollably as he stared straight at the Qinmu within the pool. At this very moment, the Qinmu within the pool seemed to have sensed something. He suddenly raised his head and looked towards them, meeting their gaze. The fake celestial venerable Yu was astonished. He watched as the black water rose up from the pool, gradually transforming into the form of Qinmu before them. That Qinmu strode forwards, walking out of the black pool. The black water on his body retreated like black oil, and it quickly vanished. Mahakala, the helper that you have invited is here? The black oil on his body had completely disappeared, and he revealed a smile as he looked towards Mahakala and the fake celestial venerable Yu. The two of them stared at him intensely, unable to tell if this Qinmu who walked out of the black water was real or fake. Suddenly, from outside the palace came Qinmu's voice. He laughed and said, "Since he has arrived then please." Both of them were shocked. They watched as the Qinmu before them gave a weird smile before collapsing and transforming into a pool of black oil. The overlord body is unpredictability mysterious. You must be careful. Mahakala continued solemnly. I have never seen such a sinister being. He's even more sinister than the devil gods. Mahakala, you have been beaten till you lost your acute spirit. After hiding in the lower bound for so long, you have no idea how terrifying the celestial heavens of today is. Celestial Venerable Yu smiled slightly, walking out of the palace. This body of mine is the amalgamation of the intelligence of the celestial heavens from the past million years. It is the most powerful weapon. In the future, the celestial heavens will depend on such a weapon to cleanse the heaven and earth, clean up the universe, cut down all devil miasma and attain the unknown realms that which you can only aspire in your lifetime but never attain. Mahakala's expression darkened and he snorted coldly, standing up to follow him out. In the future there will be 10 great gods who will rule the universe and rule each of the worlds, irregardless if it were Yudu or Xuandu, Yuandu, or the ruins of Ens. All of these places will no longer have any power to rebel. There will not be any possibility for them to be able to rebel or go against the celestial heavens. Celestial Venerable Yu voice contained a stimulating power that gripped at people's hearts. By then there will no longer be the so-called reforms, because all of the techniques and skills, all of the divine art, all of the great Tao will be contained within this body. No matter how the innumerous gods and beings of the future try to put to use their intelligence and wisdom, they will not be able to go beyond the knowledge that is contained within this body. They will very sorrowfully discover that all the efforts they have made, all the reforms, will be within the control of this body. In the future, he revealed a smile. To the ambitious, it would be an incredibly pessimistic and hopeless future. To those like us who wield power, we will have a future free of worries. Mahakala felt a great tremor in his heart, speaking in a low voice. A lifeless future. He was even a little fearful of the future situations that he had imagined. Just try imagining for a while that in the near future, there will be 10 of the strongest indomitable celestial venerable Yus, wielding the strongest powers of all time, floating high up in the skies of the different worlds in the universe, suppressing everything. Their faces will be like the physical incarnation of the heavenly Tao, their eyes like the sun and the moon, their bodies stronger and tougher than any weapon in the world, and the immensity of their magic powers will be even more boundless than the sea of the netherworld. They will float above the sun, moon and stars, even above the galaxies, as heaven and earth revolves around them. In this world the ancient gods have fallen, the common people are insignificant regardless of the god race, devil race or the human race. All would seem like ants, and everything would be under the surveillance and control of these 10 indomitable gods. What kind of horrifying future would that be? Hopefully this day would never come. Mahakala composed himself, catching up with Celestial Venerable Yu. Celestial Venerable Yu walked out of the palace. Qinmu was stretching his body in front of the palace, doing all sorts of stretches that seem impossible to normal people. Celestial Venerable Yu smiled slightly, watching him stretch out his muscles and bones. After a short period, Qin Mu turned to look at Mahakala, revealing a smile. Mahakala, is this person the powerful being that you have invited? Upon defeating him, will the bet between us then be in effect? Mahakala nodded, replying solemnly, yes. If you defeat him, the rulers of the 316 heavens will be at your disposal. Those 316 fools, I will let you take them freely. I won't interfere again, but I will also not hand over the northern heavens. Qin Mu laughed out loud. I want to lay down the Pact of the Earth Count with you, however you are two of you do. There are too many loopholes in the Pact of the Earth Count. Earth Count is too simple-minded, he doesn't know how to work around. If I lay down the Pact of the Little Earth Count with you, the Little Earth Count may not be able to defeat you. Thus, I can only count on you keeping your promise. Celestial Venerable Yu gave a small smile. Young man, you don't have to consider all these because you simply cannot win. You are the rumored one and only overlord body, but this body of mine is the king of all overlord bodies. There's only one of it in millions of years. Qin Mu laughed softly, taking a step back. His body was now hidden in the darkness outside of the palace. Only 2 rows of snow-white teeth floating in the air could be seen. The spotlessly white teeth that was floating in the air opened and Qin Mu's laughter could be heard. This brother, please. Brother? You call me brother. Celestial Venerable Yu couldn't resist smiling. Taking one step forwards and walking into the darkness, he laughed. How insolent. In the darkness, rays of lights burst forward abruptly. Qin Mu and this Celestial Venerable Yu had already started to exchange blows. Their divine art swept the darkness away from the surroundings of the palace of Mahakala in a split second, revealing the enormous planet behind the palace. The surface of its body was multicolored, and it was extremely rough-looking. Surrounding the palace of Mahakala, the numerous huge and towering gods and devils, as though they were forged from meteorites, stood tall in the darkness, looking like all sorts of strange sturdy mountains and remaining motionless, allowing the divine art from the two to clash against the surface of their skin. The aftereffects of Qin Mu and this Celestial Venerable Yu's divine art raised a gale with such violent wind speeds that wherever it passed and rubbed against the air, there were lightning flashes and thunder rumbles. When the gale blew past the bodies of these gods and devils, it actually caused a huge fire from the friction, setting the skins of these gods and devils ablaze. It was like a prairie fire. There were 316 gods and devils. They were the rulers of the 316 heavens of the north. Their abilities were far beyond that of the other gods and devils. They were incredible, formidable, and most were beings of the Jade Capital realm. Even if they were at the center of the clashes of Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu's divine art, they would also be unscathed. This battle concerned their fate in future. Thus they have to personally witness the victory or defeat of this battle. Within the palace of Mahakala, Mo Santong, Xue Taidu and the other disciples of Mahakala quickly walked out, looking towards the darkness. Their expressions changed suddenly. In the darkness, all of Celestial Venerable Yu's various great Tao divine art were executed with ease. Any of the divine art that he casually executed seemed to be great divine art that could enter the path. It was as though he mastered every single paths, skills and divine arts in the world, and he had comprehended every system of paths, skills and divine arts to the level of entering the path. Entering the path, there were also differences in levels. Divine arts practitioners and gods and devils use the heavens to differentiate the levels of entering the path. Being able to comprehend a single skill of divine art to enter the path, it is the first heaven. Comprehending the second skill of great divine art to enter the path, that is the second heaven. The different great Taoists had heavens with different levels. For example, the Sword Tao, the most powerful record of the Sword Tao was made by the founding emperor. It was rumored that the founding emperor's Sword Tao had 33 levels of heaven. He was the only one from past to present, and even until now no one had managed to break his record. Thus the celestial heavens of the founding emperor had 33 levels of heaven. The celestial heaven was then built on the 33rd heaven. Then there is also the Buddhism Tao. The strongest record of the Buddhism Tao was of Brahma Buddhas. There were 20 heavens of the Buddha realm, and it was rumored that the 20 heavens were formed from his great Tao. And there was also the Devil Tao. The Devil Tao of Mahakala had also reached an unfathomable level. Just exactly how many levels of heaven he had attained in entering the path, Mahakala had never mentioned it before. However, previously when Great Emperor of the Martial Path, one of the 4 great heavenly teachers of the founding emperor came, Mahakala had executed a total of 17 skills of great divine art that could enter the path, resulting in losses on both ends. As the disciples of Mahakala, Mo Santong, Xue Taidu and the others were lucky to be able to view that battle. Back then, some of the junior brothers amongst them had not entered the path, yet because they had viewed that battle they managed to enter the path in one go, gaining extraordinary attainments. The opportunity to encounter the fight between the 2 great emperors thrown powerful individuals was one that may only come by with luck. However, what truly made them astonished was that the youth that Mahakala had invited could actually execute any great Tao divine art, and regardless of which level of heavens the great divine art was at, he could execute it with ease. It was extremely wondrous. This was something that should be impossible, yet it was actually happening before their eyes. For a similar great Tao like the heavenly Tao, he could even execute all 49 different types of divine art that entered the path without repetition. He could even execute 58 kinds of divine art that entered the path for Mother Earth's great Tao of magnetism. The 360 different types of divine art that entered the path dazzled their eyes. To those like Mo Santong, the levels of entering the path were differentiated by the different heavens. However, to the ancient beings of the celestial heavens, the so-called levels of heavens of entering the path were merely serial numbers like Tao 1, Tao 2, Tao 3 and so on. Of the living beings of the lower bound, there were innumerous divine arts practitioners who trained painstakingly to be able to enter the path. They racked their brains strenuously, pursuing it arduously. Yet, these extraordinarily intelligent people would not have been able to expect for the Tao ancestor of the Tao sect to actually restructure almost all of the ancient gods and the great Tao of the ancient gods as algebra, turning it all into knowledge, and making it unexpectedly easy to enter the path. What made Mo Santong and the others even more astonished was that Qin Mu had managed to block all of it. No matter how many levels of heavens of divine art that celestial venerable you executed, Qin Mu had blocked each and every one of it, even being able to retaliate. In the darkness, light rays burst out ceaselessly. The figures of Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu could also be intermittently seen in the dark. At one instant their blows clashed, and in the next instant they could reappear 100 miles away. In this instant they may be in close combat, fighting each other physically perilously. In the next moment they may be 100 miles apart, blasting out great divine art, and with the clash of their divine art, it would explode at the center with extreme brilliance. Suddenly, the 2 of them appeared on the head of a 4-headed devil god that stood in the darkness. The devil god had 4 heads, and they were all covered with black hair that were as thick as trees. Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu each stood at the tip of a hair, squashing the hair of the devil god till it was slightly bent. Qin Mu pressed the sword fingers on both his hands and his sword pellet suddenly burst open, transforming into numerous flying swords that traveled speedily through the forest of hair of the devil god, flying towards Celestial Venerable Yu from the bottom to the top with murderous intent. Celestial Venerable Yu gave off divine rays of magnetism, and above his head floated the galaxy and constellations. Between the stars, the divine rays of magnetism connected and sucked up all the flying swords with a swoosh, nailing them onto the stars. Celestial Venerable Yu rubbed his palms. The galaxy shifted upright, revolved about and flew towards Qin Mu. In an instant it transformed into a huge constellation formation that drowned Qin Mu. The numerous thick strands of hair on the devil god's head were ripped out by the huge formation. The strands of hair dripped demon blood at their ends and floated into the air. Suddenly, a devil's sun rose from the center of the huge constellation formation, tainting all the stars in a split second, and there were no more light in the sun and the moon. Qin Mu took off the willow leaf on the heart of his brows. A black sun appeared behind his head, and he broke through the huge constellation formation. Shaking his head, he grew 2 more heads. Now he had 3 heads and 9 eyes. Qin Mu stood on the last strand of hair of the 4-headed devil god, his body spinning around like a spinning top. Swoosh! Divine rays from his 9 eyes cut through his surroundings, slicing apart the stars and the thick hairs of the devil god that floated in the air. Celestial Venerable Yu leaped into the air, avoiding this attack. His footsteps moved about speedily, landing on the eyelash of the left eye of one of this devil god's head. In the next instant, Qin Mu appeared on the eyelash of the devil god's right eye. The four-headed devil god widened his eyes, his eyeballs rolling downwards to stare at them. A huge droplet of sweat emerged from his forehead, and a drop of sweat the size of a small hill rolled down his nose bridge, hanging off the tip of his nose. At the split second that Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu's divine art burst out, the devil god finally couldn't resist and shut his eyes. When he reopened his eyes, Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu had already left his eyes, and were now on the shoulder of another gigantic devil god, fighting from his shoulder to his huge earlobe. The earlobe of the devil god was very long. The two of them stood on his earlobe, their bodies parallel to the ground as they fought in close combat. Qin Mu executed the martial path Great Divine Art while Celestial Venerable Yu had a true dragon coiling around his body, executing the full extent of the great Tao of East Deity Qing Long. An enormous crash resounded and the devil god with the long earlobe couldn't help but tilted his head, patting on his ear. At this moment, Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu had already left his earlobe, landing on the multicolored ribbon rays that coiled around another female devil god. The two of them sprinted as though they were flying on the ribbons several miles apart, their divine art ever-changing as they attacked each other in a frenzy. The eyeballs of the female devil god rolled about frantically, trying to see the battle situation of the two that was at the ribbon behind her back, yet she was unable to see it. Suddenly, the two of them had followed the path of her ribbon and were transforming as they moved along. They flashed by the front of her chest, as though crossing two steamed bun mountains. Qin Mu was distracted as he looked towards it and was flung out with a blow from Celestial Venerable Yu, breaking his bones and snapping his tendons. The female devil god could not help herself and giggled, her two peaks trembling involuntarily. Celestial Venerable Yu could not resist and turned to look at it, and he was struck in the head with a sudden blow of the knife, landing in the center of the peaks. The figures of the two vanished again. In the next instant they reappeared in the middle of two devil gods, each spitting out blood and staring at each other intensely. Solely relying on the strength of this corporeal body, I cannot take you down. Celestial Venerable Yu revealed an expression of admiration, smiling. It seems like only by utilizing my own path, skills and divine art can I take you. Mahakala, this opponent of yours is truly something. Using your Dark Emoja Sutra to exchange for me to fight for you, you are not losing out either. In the distance, Mahakala snorted in response. Qin Mu held his breath with rapt attention. The devil path divine treasures within his body opened up one by one. The divine treasures of the god path and the divine treasures of the devil path merged into one. Celestial Venerable Yu hadn't utilized his full abilities, but similarly, he hadn't either. Qin Mu's goal was to force Celestial Venerable Yu to utilize his full abilities. He wanted to see if the person behind Celestial Venerable Yu was one of the 9 Celestial Venerables from back in the day. Even if this person wasn't one of the 9 Celestial Venerables, Qin Mu would still be able to observe his cultivation attainments through his divine arts. When Qin Mu defeated the previous Celestial Venerable Yu, even in death, that Celestial Venerable Yu hadn't demonstrated his true capabilities because he wasn't willing to reveal his true identity. This Celestial Venerable Yu, however, intended to execute his own ultimate arts, something Qin Mu greatly anticipated. Within the celestial heavens, there were few who were qualified to obtain the corporeal body of Celestial Venerable Yu, and to be able to control his corporeal body and go to the lower bounds, only leaders or masterminds of the Heaven Alliance would be qualified. Qin Mu wanted to see just how formidable this being who controlled the celestial heavens could be. Within his body, the Overlord Body 3 elixir technique was already circulating in full force, connecting all 14 of his divine treasures together. The celestial river was vast, and it passed through life and death, celestial being, 7 stars, 6 directions, 5 elements, and spirit embryo, turning and flowing past Xuandu, entering the divine treasures of the devil path, the 14 divine treasures merging into one. Qin Mu's primordial spirit unified God and devil, and his Overlord Body 3 elixir technique had combined all his powers into one. His primordial spirit stood upright atop the celestial river, prepared to burst out with all his power and all his potential at any time. This would be the most powerful strike of his entire life. The darkness surrounding the palace of Mahakala returned, flooding over Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu. Suddenly, there was a loud sound from behind the palace. The gigantic star split apart, and a long valley emerged, stretching through both sides of the planet. The valley continued to split apart to the sides, the mountains retreated, and the seas receded. The valley grew bigger and bigger, wider and wider, revealing an unimaginable-looking eyeball. The enormous devil. I looked into the darkness, waiting for Celestial Venerable Yu and Qin Mu to make their moves in the dark. It had great anticipation for this battle. This eye was the eye of Mahakala's true body. The Mahakala that appeared before everyone wasn't his true body. After all, he was the first devil god, and his true body was too colossal. If he showed his true body, even gods and devils wouldn't be able to see his entire form clearly. Thus, Mahakala used a fake body to appear before everyone, hiding his true body within the darkness. When Qin Mu came to the palace of Mahakala, after staying there for some time, he had walked into the darkness. Searching around the dark, he had felt a terrifyingly huge thing within the darkness and had then returned to the palace with a smile. At that time, he had already sensed that the real Mahakala was hiding within the darkness. Knowing that he wasn't able to leave, he decided to just happily turn around and go back into the palace. Within the dark, violent tremors emerged. It was as if the whole space had continuously vibrated tens of thousands of times, and everyone who stood before the palace was unable to achieve stable footing. This wasn't due to the clash of Qin Mu's and Celestial Venerable Yu's divine arts. It was the energy that burst out from Celestial Venerable Yu's activation of his divine art. It was hard to imagine that a body of the divine bridge realm was actually able to contain such an immense and boundless power within it. In the dark, Qin Mu was at the center of the tremor. Celestial Venerable Yu's divine art was like a calamity of heaven and earth that exploded, taking with it boundless rage to punish all the treason and heresy of this world. Qin Mu also burst out thoroughly. There were no longer any other thoughts or ideas in his mind. His qi and blood were like violent waves. It was like the spirit of an era was burning in his qi and blood. It was incredibly intense, like a fiery blaze on boiling oil. He sprinted forwards frantically, as quick as a flickering shadow. His speed was so fast that even the qi and blood that were like the vast sea could barely catch up with his figure. He raised the huge sea of qi and blood, and it stood upright, as though it was a banner that had been dyed with blood. The waves of this sea of qi and blood rumbled ceaselessly, letting out rolling thunder sounds. The sword pellet in his hand transformed into an incomparable sword will, and pierced towards the enraged god within the darkness. Before the palace of Mahakala, Mo Santong, Xue Taidu, and the others looked out into the darkness towards Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu. However, they weren't able to see anything. The darkness had blocked their vision. The other indomitable gods and devils within the darkness were sweeping the surroundings, trying to view this battle clearly. Their gazes were like torches, like pillars of light slicing through the dark, yet they were still only able to see fragments of the scene, only capturing sights of the figures flashing past and the apparitions of divine arts that continuously burst out. Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu were too fast, and the surroundings were enshrouded in darkness. There weren't many places that their sight could reach. Suddenly, it all quietened down. "Has it ended?" one of the rulers of the heavens mumbled. At this moment, a few hundred miles away, another divine arts explosion swept towards them. Everyone looked towards it anxiously. Their gazes had only just landed there. Yet Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu had already vanished, leaving behind a mountain peak that had been snapped apart. They watched as the peak fell off, smashing into the valley with a dull thud. Following that, another loud sound of divine arts exploding came from 100 miles away. The more than 300 rulers of the heavens hurriedly turned to look in that direction, the numerous pillars of light lighting up that area. Qin Mu's body hung from a mountain peak. His 3 heads and 6 limbs had been beaten and damaged beyond repair. Celestial Venerable Yu bowed towards him, and the mountain peak blew up. Qin Mu was blown to the other end of the peak, where he couldn't be seen anymore. Celestial Venerable Yu's figure quickly vanished as well. Finally, they sensed another wave of divine arts. When the gazes of the more than 300 rulers of the heavens shone in that direction, the sword light in Qin Mu's hand had reached over a dozen miles long. It didn't seem like a sword, it more resembled a pillar that was almost a yard wide in radius. The sword crashed down on Celestial Venerable Yu, sweeping across the waist of a mountain. The mountain was snapped into 2 at the waist, yet the peak didn't fall off. This was because the speed of Qin Mu's sword was so fast that although the peak was shortened by a chunk, it still landed flat on the body of the mountain. The rulers of the heavens were all top existences amongst the gods and devils, and thus, as their gazes lit up the area, they were able to see the sword pillar in Qin Mu's hands very clearly for what it was. It wasn't actually a sword pillar. It was a pillar made out of numerous moving flying swords that were each executing a different sword skill, and were jumping about within in a strange manner. Looking from afar, it looked as though Qin Mu had picked up a pillar that was dozens of miles long. Celestial Venerable Yu looked like he had been crushed by the sword pillar, but in actuality, he was blocking the sword lights that were ceaselessly piercing towards him from within the sword pillar. He had received dozens of sword stabs, and he revealed a look of astonishment in his eyes. He had opened his mouth and was saying something, but due to their distance, they weren't able to hear what he was saying. What is he saying exactly? The rulers of the heavens felt bewildered. Darkness surged forth again, and Qin Mu and Celestial Venerable Yu vanished within. When the wave of divine arts emerged again, Celestial Venerable Yu's palm, on which 3 fingers had been broken off, was pressing on Qin Mu's face. He smashed him ruthlessly into a huge lake within the darkness. The water in the lake burst out, and almost all of it was sent flying into the air. It was as though a meteor had crashed into the surface of the lake. A few hundred gazes stared in that direction. At the bottom of the lake, Celestial Venerable Yu's fists were like a fiery storm, crushing Qin Mu as he frantically pounded down on him. The ground surrounding the lake cracked continuously. The fissures were astonishing, reaching several yards in depth and continuing to grow deeper. Suddenly, Celestial Venerable Yu leaped into the air like a startled goose, narrowly avoiding a pitch-black gate. The moment he avoided this gate of heaven influence, a ray of sword light pierced out from the gate. There was a figure standing at the center of the gate, who had been beaten up beyond recognition. Shockingly, it was Qin Mu. The sword pierced straight into the heart of Celestial Venerable Yu's brow. Celestial Venerable Yu waved his hand to cleave the sword, actually using his palm to break the divine sword with sheer brute force. The two of them vanished again. When the two of them reappeared, Qin Mu was running away, trying to escape the horrifying forces behind him, wearing an expression of terror on his face. Yet, numerous bits of starlight suddenly appeared before him, entangling together into chains. Qin Mu was caught by surprise, and he ran through the net of chains formed by the starlight. He was suddenly minced into several hundred pieces, and even his head had dropped off. The Overlord body has lost. The more than 300 rulers of the heavens all let out sighs of relief and revealed smiles. The Pact of Little Earth count can also be rescinded now. At this very moment, they saw that the several hundred pieces of Qin Mu had all grown out arms and legs and were running about everywhere. As they ran about, they actually merged back together, forming a complete Qin Mu. The gods and devils of the northern heavens watched this sight in a daze, and they were slightly perplexed. Undying body? The enormous devil eye behind the palace of Mahakala was shocked. Wasn't it long lost following the disappearance of Crimson Emperor? How is it possible that there is still someone who is able to cultivate to a similar level of Crimson Emperor? Behind Qin Mu, numerous flying swords broke out of the ground. Resembling sword mountains and sword forests, they broke through the divine art that was chasing after him. Qin Mu turned around and raised his 6 arms up high. The sword mountains and sword forests rose up, rumbling, following the directions of his 6 arms and cleaving down as they did. One of Celestial Venerable Yu's arms was chopped off, and he retreated backwards, the two of them disappearing into the darkness again. This time, for a long period, no sounds were heard, and there were no waves from divine arts. The rulers of the heavens surrounding the palace all concentrated their gazes, the numerous light pillars bursting through the darkness as they searched around. However, the darkness that enshrouded the palace reached thousands of miles around it. Even given the power of their gazes, they were still unable to find the two of them in a short period of time. Where did they go? At this very instant, suddenly, there was loud crackling at the center of the gods, and thunder and lightning lit up the entire area until it turned as bright as snow. Qin Mu had an arm pierced through his chest as he fell from the sky. Before he landed on the ground, suddenly, the gate of heaven influence appeared and swallowed him up. The gate of heaven influence vanished, and there was nothing on the ground. Far in the distance, a sword light appeared, and the gate of heaven influence reappeared. Within the gate, there were two white skeletons fighting each other relentlessly. One of the skeletons had an arm stabbed through his chest, while the other skeleton was missing an arm. The towering gate of heaven influence floated about in the air, drawing the attention of everyone. Inside the gate, the two skeletons were still trying to kill each other without restraint. These two fellows, do they want to perish together? Suddenly, the gate of heaven influence fell with a loud crash, standing upright before the palace of Mahakala. The gate shut suddenly, and clashing sounds could be heard from within. The two skeletons were probably still beating each other up. There was utter silence surrounding the gate. No one dared to even breathe loudly as they waited quietly. After a long time, suddenly the noise inside quieted down. Everyone continued to wait. After a while, the gate creaked noisily and opened up slowly. Suddenly, fresh blood gushed out, surging out of the gate like floodwater, and there were fragments of broken bones within the blood. Everyone was in shock, and they waited further. From the gate, a white skeleton supported itself on the gate and walked out. With a splash, it fell into the pool of blood, and blood and flesh started to grow out of the body. Overlord, body of eternal peace, you truly live up to your reputation. The most formidable big shot of the celestial heavens, under the same realm, is still unable to deal with you. Mahakala suddenly burst out into laughter as he clapped his hands together. You won, I have lost. The 316 rulers of the heavens are at your disposal. However, my northern heavens, you don't even have to think about laying a finger on it. Rulers of the heavens, take your master, and get out of my territory. The more than 300 rulers of the heavens didn't move, their gazes landing one by one on Chinmu, who was lying in the pool of blood, his blood and flesh still growing. If we kill him, the pact of Little Earth count is no longer going to be a problem, a devil god mumbled. Suddenly, the gods and devils moved together, attacking Chinmu. Mahakala closed his eyes, muttering, "Why are there so many idiots under me?" In the split second that the killing intent of these gods and devils emerged, the first devil god had already collapsed. His eyes were initially bursting with life, but in a split second, his eyes became empty and hollow. All the life in his eyes had vanished. His corporeal body was still undamaged, yet his breathing had stopped instantly. It was as though some terrifying force had emptied out his primordial spirit in that instant, letting him die incomparably quickly. It was just that the other gods and devils were still pouncing towards Chinmu, so no one had noticed yet. However, in the next instant, the eyes of the second devil god dulled, his sprinting figure having collapsed. In another instant, it was a third devil god and then a fourth devil god. When the devil god who had reached Chinmu first burst out his divine art, behind him came the sounds of the gods and devils collapsing. He turned his head to look behind him with a blank gaze. The rulers of each northern heavens resembled a series of figures that he left behind from leaping into mid-air. These figures collapsed one after the other, their palms reaching forwards, their eyes turning ghastly white, and their faces wearing incredibly horrifying expressions. Little Earth count. The sole remaining devil god had only just spoken that line when darkness loomed over his eyes. In the dark, a flame resembling the shape of a butterfly appeared, flying out to the sides, looking extremely beautiful. It was an eye that radiated shocking beauty, yet it was filled with a demonic aura. The eye glanced at him, and he lost his consciousness. Thump! The last corpse fell to the ground. The rest of the rulers of the heavens revealed looks of terrors, all retreating, yet it was already too late. One of the rulers of the heavens was suddenly drained of his soul. He pinched at his neck with both hands and opened his wide mouth. His tongue then rolled out as he kneeled downwards without any breath left. Following, it was the second ruler of the heavens and then the third. The rest of them fell into a state of extreme fear, trying to escape in all directions. Yet death followed them like a shadow, sticking to them like a maggot in their bodies, taking away their lives one by one. Mahakala, save me! One of the rulers cried out shrilly in the dark, but his cry was abruptly cut off. He became a corpse and fell from the sky, crashing into the ground limply. Mahakala didn't open his eye. Regarding what was happening in the darkness, he had long predicted it. The defeat of Celestial Venerable Yu this time made him determined to sacrifice these old subordinates. and he was adamant about not interfering. Not every ruler of the heavens had killing intent towards Qin Mu. Yet death didn't seem to care whether or not they did. The Devil King that controlled death was stubbornly following the pact of Little Earth Count that they had set and was here to reap the souls. As long as the pact of Little Earth Count was set, if they didn't follow the bet they had agreed on with Saint Woodcutter to annex the northern heavens to eternal peace, then they would all be left to his mercy. In the pool of blood, Qin Mu's skeleton was still growing flesh and blood. He raised a palm weakly, wanting to save some of the rulers of the heavens to be the battle power of Eternal Peace Empire. However, he was really too frail. In the battle against Celestial Venerable Yu had already executed up to the 28th level of heavens in the great divine arts of entering the path. This was an existence who had almost mastered all of the ancient gods' great Tao with the Tao realm of 28 heavens. Qin Mu could fight him to the death only because he relied on combining all of the results of the reforms of eternal peace within himself, and also because he relied on his magic power being much stronger than Celestial Venerable Yu's. Even then, Qin Mu was still almost beaten until his form and spirit were completely destroyed. Now, he no longer had the strength to stop his other self. At that moment, his brother Qin Fengqing must have been shivering with agitation as he excitedly reaped the souls of the rulers of the northern heavens as per the pact of Little Earth Count, saving them in his slaughter cauldron to feed on them slowly. Rationality didn't exist for Qin Fengqing. Inside his brain, other than his mother, all the beings and living things in the world were differentiated only by what could or couldn't be eaten. Even his father Qin Hanjin and brother Qin Mu were in the category of what could be eaten. It was only because his mother didn't want him to eat Qin Mu that he reluctantly kept his brother alive. If these rulers of heavens of the Jade Capital Realm came to eternal peace, the ability of eternal peace would be able to improve immeasurably. Blood surged out from the corners of Qin Mu's mouth, and he was incredibly pained in his heart. Finally, the last devil god collapsed in the darkness. Mahakala opened his eye, looking towards Qin Mu with an indifferent gaze. "I thought you would have kept them. I didn't realize you would be so vicious." In the pool of blood, Qin Mu's heart ached even more, and the blood in his mouth spurted out like a fountain. Mahakala turned around and walked to the palace. "Leave. I will give you half a day's time. If you cannot walk out of the boundaries of the palace of Mahakala alive, I will then kill you myself. If you escape from here, I'm willing to hold my rage and accept this, and I won't do anything to eternal peace." The dragon Qilin sprinted over hurriedly, putting Qin Mu, who was still restoring his corporeal body, onto his back. He then ran down the mountain without saying anything else. Within the palace of Mahakala, the disciples of Mahakala exchanged glances, quietly observing the silent Mahakala. This time Mahakala had made a huge loss. The two heavenly teachers, Woodcutter and Zishi, had first stirred up trouble and started the fight between the northern heavens and overlord body of eternal peace. If Mahakala hadn't stepped in, the northern heavens would have been taken by these rulers of the heavens and annexed to eternal peace in an attempt to save their own lives. Yet, despite Mahakala stepping in, the 316 rulers of the northern heavens had all lost their lives. These rulers could be said to be the most formidable battle power under him. In addition, in the selections for the strongest divine arts practitioners of each heaven, countless young practitioners had died. Mahakala was known to seek revenge for even the smallest grievances, much less now that he had suffered such a huge loss. Yet, he had restrained himself, tolerating it quietly, even doing something that seemed so ridiculous and muddle-headed like leaving half a day's time to allow Qin Mu to leave his territory. Within the same realm, he managed to defeat the most formidable weapon of the celestial heavens. He truly lives up to his reputation as the overlord body. As long as he manages to stay alive, then perhaps the future won't be all that bleak. Mahakala was lost in his thoughts for a while before he suddenly laughed out loud. "You all think that me letting him walk free is throwing away the face of the northern heavens, right?" Mo Santong, Xue Taidu, and the others didn't dare to say anything. "As your teacher, let me tell you all a secret." Mahakala gave a mischievous laugh and said, "I was born before Dragon Han. Being able to survive from the ancient times until now, it's exactly because I'm shameless." Mo Santong and the others wore odd expressions, and no one responded. Mahakala stood up, the darkness flowing behind him, and smiled. Back then, there were far too many existences that were more formidable than I was, smarter than I was, but those that survived were few. On the contrary, I was evergreen and was respected as the devil ancestor. If I wasn't shameless, I would have long been dead. Mo Santong and the rest didn't know where to look. In truth, the behaviors and mannerisms of these disciples were fairly similar to those of Mahakala. For instance, in the few days that Qin Mu had stayed in the palace, there were many disciples of Mahakala who used the excuse of challenging Qin Mu in an attempt to have Qin Mu guide them on where they lacked in their cultivation. They weren't fools. They were aware that their actions would expose Mahakala's Dark Emojia Sutra to Qin Mu. Yet to advance their own levels of cultivation, they did it anyway. This was what it meant to be in the same vein. The more chaotic the world is, the more beneficial it will be for the devil race. Mahakala continued in a leisurely tone. Only with chaos can there be a possibility for devils like us to survive. If the celestial heavens created a completely stable future, then that will truly be the end of our devil race. My purpose for inviting that existence from the celestial heavens to come and fight was also to see if this weapon of the celestial heavens could really be unrivaled. Looking at it now, the celestial heavens cannot achieve that. He laughed with great happiness. Suddenly, a weight was lifted off my chest. Purely because of this, I cannot kill the overlord body of eternal peace. Moreover, I don't have the confidence that I can kill him. Mo Santong and the others were slightly puzzled, not understanding why Mahakala attached such importance to Qin Mu. Little Earth Count is the overlord body of eternal peace. Mahakala finally said the words that sent chills down their spines. With an odd expression he continued, "As I was, he too was born in Yudu. I was born of Yudu's grudges, demonic aura, and devil chi, the first devil god. On the other hand, he was the first life form of Yudu that was born from a womb. We both have our own prominent and extraordinary areas. However, innately I am slightly inferior to him. What's strange is that he seems to be unable to control his own power. His power seems to have its own consciousness." Celestial Heavens, Guardian Pavilion. Tao Master of the Celestial Heaven Dao Sex sliced off a piece of fine jade from the top of the Guardian Pavilion. He watched as the jade pillar regenerated, quickly patching up the gap from the missing piece. The old Taoist shook his head, bringing the fine jade that held Celestial Venerable Yu's mark down and handing it to the person below. "Ancestral God King, what happened to the last weapon?" "Shattered." The person below was a handsome-looking man. His entire body radiated a mixture of white light, and his pupils were a pure white color. The man shook his head and said, "This weapon is still lacking. Heaven Duke's great Tao is imperfect. I controlled this weapon to go to the lower bound, and it was shattered by the overlord body." The old Taoist questioned in astonishment. "Overlord body? Speaking of which, this overlord body is also a celestial venerable." Ancestral God King had an odd look on his face. Back in the day, at the Jade Pool meeting, while I was congratulating Celestial Emperor for his ascension to power, the overlord body was wreaking havoc at the Jade Pool. After that, I saw the wounds left behind by his sword techniques. This time I recognized him from his sword techniques. I didn't expect him to be the overlord body of Dragon Han from back then. He even beat up that existence until he was half dead. He stopped mentioning that existence and laughed. I went down to the lower bound this time to test out the weapon. It was by that old scoundrel Mahakala's invitation to go deal with him. I ended up losing my hand, and thus I can only make another weapon. Ha ha ha. He burst out laughing, patting the old Taoist on his shoulder. "Why am I telling you all this? If you weren't the Tao Master who only seeks the Tao wholeheartedly without care for worldly affairs, purely based on what I just said, I would have had to silence you for good." The old Taoist lowered his gaze and gave a slight smile without replying to him. Ancestral God King said, "Send this treasure to the place with the creation divine weapon and build another weapon, then send it to my palace. Also, have the runes of the great Tao at Heaven Dukes been sorted out?" The old Taoist shook his head. Xuandu's Heaven Duke's corporeal body is too huge, it's hard to measure it completely. Furthermore, Heaven Duke is too powerful. The gods stationed there dare not step too far over the line. The old man is truly very powerful, very strong. His body is also very sturdy. Ancestral God King took a step to leave, continuing in a leisurely manner. However, it won't be long before I replace him. I will personally make a trip to Xuandu and sort out the remaining Great Dao runes." The old Taoist watched him leave, and he heard the joyful voice of the ancestral god king in his ear. "My father, very soon I will replace you, become you, surpass you." In the darkness, the dragon Qilin carried Qinmu and sprinted. The surroundings were dim, making it hard to identify the routes or differentiate between north and south. The dragon Qilin gradually lost his sense of direction and started to feel a sense of panic. It was pure darkness there, and if he lost his sense of direction, he wouldn't be able to carry Qinmu and leave this place within half a day's time. Qinmu was still trying his best to regenerate his corporeal body. He said weakly, "Fatty dragon, fly upwards to the topmost part of the sky and follow the sky map." The dragon Qilin came to a realization, and he gathered all his strength, flying upwards into the sky with his fastest speed. The time limit of half a day was approaching as the dragon Qilin ran as swift as wind and lightning. With Qilin fire at his feet and thunder and lightning around his body, he increased his speed to the maximum. Gradually there was light in the sky. The dragon Qilin was overjoyed, and he neared the area with light. The sky was leaking and the light was streaming down from where there was a leak in the sky. At the area of the leak, a huge formation could be seen faintly. It was probably the moon in the sky map. The formation had moved to this place and was tugged until it was all crooked and slanted where the sky map had been damaged. This caused the moonlight to spill all over the surroundings. Upon seeing this moon, Qinmu suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. The dragon Qilin's heart jolted. "Cult Master, are you still alive?" Qinmu raised a hand shakily, pointing towards that crooked moon, and said in a trembling voice, "Ugly, change place. Cult Master, be content." The dragon Qilin carried him and sprinted towards the damaged part of the moon, continuing in an angry voice, "If we still don't leave Mahakala's territory, Mahakala will come out and kill you." Qinmu still wanted to choose death over submission, but the dragon Qilin had already carried him and dashed into the sky map, entering the formation that was radiating a bright moon-like glow. "I wonder if there are still gods of the celestial heavens within this sky map?" The dragon Qilin looked around carefully, whispering, "The astrological phenomena are in disorder now, so the gods that were stationed here by the celestial heavens should have long escaped by now." "Who's there?" Suddenly, someone behind the moonlight asked. The dragon Qilin was startled to hear this, and the voice sounded familiar too. Despite that, he didn't dare to let down his guard, immediately transforming himself with a jolt of his body into the form of a sturdy-looking youth with a Qilin head and a human body. However, he had transformed too quickly and forgotten that Qinmu was still on his back. Qinmu fell off with his limbs tangled, though the dragon Qilin quickly caught him and laid him over his shoulder, looking behind the moonlight with caution. Today was the 7th day of the month. The moon formation usually became a crescent moon on this day, and the rest of the formation would be hidden by the shadows. The formation was very big and wide, spanning hundreds of miles. The portion blocked by the shadows didn't actually disappear. The formation continued to be in motion, and they were only hidden out of sight. The formation resembled a moon palace. A palace within the moon was truly a beautiful sight and very pleasant to look at. The one who controls the moon in the sky map is definitely a beautiful lady. The dragon Qilin stuck his head out of the shadows only to see that the moonlight was flowing down from where the damage was, resembling a stream of water. Within the moon was a woman sitting on the peak of the crescent. She was looking towards them as she blinked her eyes. "It's her." The dragon Qilin was slightly shocked. On his shoulder, Qinmu was like a marionette without strings. He slid off his shoulder with limp limbs, and his head was bent in a crooked manner. The dragon Qilin hurriedly caught hold of Qinmu. The woman on the crescent moon walked over and asked in an astonished tone, "What happened to him?" "Cult Master is injured," the dragon Qilin continued. "His injuries are very serious, but there shouldn't be a huge problem." "Cult Master, wake up." He shook Qinmu. Qinmu's head was shaken about like a rattle drum, and he immediately opened his eyes. Qinmu looked at the woman with semi-consciousness. He felt that she was a familiar face, but he couldn't recall who she was. "Why are you here?" he mumbled before he drifted back into unconsciousness. "Look, it's not a big problem," the dragon Qilin said confidently. The woman was, however, very worried. Sending them into the moon palace, she said, I have just cleaned up the place, you can recuperate here. The dragon Qilin settled Qin Mu down. After diagnosing Qin Mu's injuries, the woman was silent briefly before she went to refine pills and brew medicine for him. The dragon Qilin went forwards laughing. Back then you didn't know anything, yet now you can refine pills and brew medicine already? The woman smiled. After you all left, I had to do everything by myself. At that time I was still very young, I had to learn everything. It's only natural that I can do all these things after learning so much. The dragon Qilin thought for a while, replying, back then it really felt like a dream. Cult Master, Grandmaster, the chest, and I had so unexpectedly ended up at 100 Prosperity City. We then disappeared at daybreak. What we went through that night was, however, so strange that one would never be able to forget it. The woman turned her head to look at Qin Mu, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. She revealed a gentle smile. It's true. The tens of thousands of years after, I have awoken from my nightmares countless times. Thinking back on that night's experience, it gave me the courage to continue living. Qin Mu could hear the familiar voice by his ear. He had wanted to open his eyes a few times, but because he was too heavily injured and his origin had suffered damage, he fell back into unconsciousness again. He had already pulled through the worst, it was mainly that Celestial Venerable Yu was too powerful. In the fight against Qin Mu, he had executed his own ultimate art of entering the path, executing from Tao 1 to Tao 28. The 28 continuous great divine arts of entering the path had forced Qin Mu to give it all he had. After exerting his all in the fight, Qin Mu was almost burned out. He had no other choice but to utilize his origin power, using the Anusrava creation mysterious scripture and 3 primordial spirit, undying God consciousness to mend his corporeal body and primordial spirit. This led to even greater exhaustion in his body. Now he was drifting in and out of consciousness. He felt bitterness in his mouth, and it seemed like someone was feeding him medicine. The spirit medicine entered his throat and turned into a hot stream that flowed into his abdominal cavity. It started to surge around inside of him, flowing into his limbs and his bones. He opened his eyes and could faintly see a familiar-looking woman opening her mouth and spitting out a spirit bead. The spirit bead spun around him, and it made his primordial spirit and damaged divine treasures feel an indescribable comfort. Qin Mu drowsily fell back asleep. By his ear were the sounds of the woman and the dragon Qilin having a conversation. It seemed that the dragon Qilin and the woman were very familiar with each other. After an unknown period of time, the voices of other people reached Qin Mu's ears. They sounded like Woodcutter or Heavenly Teacher Zishi, and it also sounded like Diyue and the others were there. He couldn't hear what they were saying, then it quieted down. Qin Mu was asleep. In his dreams he felt like he had returned to the days of his childhood. Time seemed to be reversing, and he was back in the disabled elderly village, training diligently under the supervision of Old Ma, Butcher, and the others. Time reversed even further in his dreams. He was now a baby lying in a small basket. His hands and legs were stretched outwardly as he wailed, looking at Granny C and her outstretched arms with his bright eyes. Granny C was very ugly, yet her gaze was gentle as she carried him out of the basket. Beside her was a stone statue, and beside it was a similarly gentle-looking Old Ma. The scene in his dream retreated, and time seemed to have reversed again, though he was still in the basket. He saw a girl who was carrying a basket and was fearfully hiding in the raging river from the gods and devils chasing after her. The massive black water rolled up everything. Qin Mu looked at that girl from inside his basket. She was fighting against the gods and devils with all her might, protecting him. She was covered in wounds and was thoroughly exhausted. Aunt Pinger! The swaddled baby raised his short little arms, trying to touch her face, yet he couldn't reach her. Qin Mu had never found the memories of him leaving Yudu and being left in the great ruins. He was too young. Earth Count had sealed him, and then his mother handed him to Aunt Pinger, who had escorted him out of Yudu and into the great ruins. Aunt Pinger had died in the river to protect him, and Granny C had saved him when the darkness arrived. This memory was a blank to him, yet in this dream, he could actually faintly remember it. In the darkness, the black waters of the raging river surged and shrouded them. There were vicious-looking gods and devils chasing after them in the water, and on both sides of the river. Aunt Pinger's injuries were getting worse, and it was difficult for her to protect him anymore. At this moment, the Qin Mu in the dream recalled a snow-white fog moving towards them. Aunt Pinger carried the basket and dashed into the fog with unsteady movement. The pursuers too ran into the fog. When the fog dissipated, there was a radiant sun in the sky. The sunlight shone so brilliantly that the swaddled baby shut his eyes and hid his face inside the cloth. Aunt Pinger had blood flowing out of her mouth as she continued to run unsteadily. She covered the basket with her palm, humming a folk song to coax the baby to sleep. Tall reed, long reed, playing hide-and-seek in the reed marshes. How many powerful and famous people were once the cowherds of the past. Tall reed, long reed, looking at each other across mountains and across seas. On this side of the reed is the hometown, on the other side of the reed is the sea. Tall reed, long reed, weaving by the reed marshes. When the weave is done, it is rolled into my bag. It accompanies me on my journey thus on to afar. Tall reed, long reed, the reed flute tune is melodious. The cowherds are in a distant land, always on the minds of their father and mother. Qin Mu listened to it in a daze, wanting to sing along. However, in the dream he was just a baby of 2 to 3 months old, so he wasn't able to. The pursuers were on their tails, the gods and devils vicious and fierce. At the source of the raging river, in her despair, Aunt Pinger saw a woman washing her sword by the river. Qin Mu saw that the sword-washing woman had a familiar face. She looked like the girl who was feeding him medicine. Aunt Pinger asked for help, and the woman pulled out her sword. The sword was like a dragon dancing in the air. It could enrapture an entire city and be lauded in 9 prefectures. It was a familiar sword light. The sword techniques were evolved from Qin Mu's sword techniques, and it carried the essence and spirit that protected ordinary people in the apocalypse. What is his name? The sword-washing woman came to Aunt Pinger's side, looking at the baby inside the basket. His name is Qin Fengqing. Aunt Pinger looked at the baby in the basket with a gentle gaze as blood spilled out from the corners of her mouth. I have to send him to a safe place. I cannot let those gods and devils harm him. But I can't go on anymore. I wish to entrust him to you. The sword-washing woman shook her head. My name is Bai Chuer. I am one of the remaining survivors of High Emperor. I am hiding from the pursuits of my enemies, and have already killed a group of pursuers. Leaving him to me will only endanger him further. I can protect you for some time, but it cannot be for too long. They moved along the river. The radiant sun hung in the skies to the west. Aunt Pinger hummed a nursery rhyme as the sword-washing woman listened on quietly. After walking for an unknown distance, the sound of the nursery rhyme suddenly stopped. The sword-washing woman looked towards Aunt Pinger. She had already stopped breathing, and her eyes were lifeless. She continued to walk along the river carrying the basket as a walking corpse. The extremely strong attachment allowed her to continue moving forwards, to stubbornly continue to find a safe place for this swaddled baby, and to find someone she could entrust him to. The sword-washing woman was in a daze, yet she didn't take the basket away from Aunt Pinger's arms. She wasn't someone who should be entrusted with the baby. She could only protect this stubborn corpse, protecting her until she found someone. She hummed the nursery rhyme that the girl had hummed before she died. Tall reed, long reed, playing hide-and-seek in the reed marshes. How many powerful and famous people were once the cowherds of the past. Aunt Pinger's corpse followed the song and walked forwards with a smile on her face. They continued along the river, and she didn't stop humming. Finally, the skies started to dull, and the darkness was about to arrive. Tall reed, long reed, the reed flute tune is melodious. The cowherds are in a distant land, always on the minds of their father and mother. The sword-washing woman sang the nursery rhyme as darkness and fog surged forward, drowning Aunt Pinger behind her. The sword-washing woman walked into the fog, watching as Aunt Pinger sank into the waters. She was still holding the basket up high. The river gushed and carried them downstream. Don't go outside when it's dark. In the far distance, a voice could be heard from the village by the river. Everyone listen. A child is crying outside. Impossible. You must be hearing things. There really is a baby crying. In the fog, the sword-washing woman watched as a hunchback old woman carried the baby out of the basket before she gradually retreated. I've used the Boundless Calamity Sutra, entering the path through dreams to help him trace his origin and preserve his soul. At present, his life is no longer in danger. Within the Qin word land, the old Buddha who had always been asleep had landed suddenly, speaking to Heaven Duke, Earth Count, and the others. I originally intended to impart my Boundless Calamity Sutra to him, but he didn't have the fate for it. At present, helping him to enter the path through dreams within his dream, and through remembering his past, his comprehending of my Boundless Calamity Sutra is only a matter of time. Heaven Duke replied. Fortunately, old Buddha woke up in time. Otherwise, even if he survived, I fear he may have suffered great losses to his cultivation. At this very moment, Qin Mu gradually woke up, and a familiar nursery rhyme could be heard by his ear. Tall reed, long reed, the reed catkins resemble snow. The reed knows best of the violent winds, the reed knows best of the raging rain. He struggled to get out of bed, following the sound of the song and walking outside. The song made him feel like he had returned to his days as a cowherd. By the reed catkins, the sound of the reed flute was clear and melodious, and the snow-white reed catkins fluttered about in the wind. He walked outside. The moonlight was brilliant, and a familiar-looking girl sat in the moon palace, humming the nursery rhyme as she looked down at the mountains and rivers of eternal peace. She turned her head around, giving him a peaceful and shy smile. Seeing her smile, Qin Mu felt like his heart had melted. It had melted in those days under the radiant sunlight, by the reed marshes along the river, where the snow-white reed catkins fluttered and the cowherd sat on his cow as the cow walked slowly by the riverside. That day there was a strange melody that echoed in his head. He wanted to hum it, to sing it out, yet he was not able to. He had felt that the tune was so familiar, so dear, yet he couldn't seem to recall it. At this moment he remembered that nursery rhyme. When he was swaddled in the basket, he had heard the nursery rhyme, he had heard this voice. He walked to the side of the girl who was humming the nursery rhyme that was familiar to him yet one that he couldn't recall, and he sat down with a smile. It's been a long time since we last met. Do you still remember that baby called Qin Fengqing in the basket? I am him. Bai Chuer looked at him, an expression of astonishment slowly appearing on her face, though it soon became a smile. Do you still remember that girl who sat atop the chest? I remember. Qin Mu felt a burning sensation in his chest, but he couldn't tell if it was because his injuries weren't healed yet, or if there were some weird emotions acting up within him. Bai Chuer hugged her knees with both hands, her body sitting upright as she looked down at the sight below with a dazed expression. Eternal peace is really beautiful. Qin Mu looked downwards and saw tens of thousands of lit-up homes. On the vast land, amongst the mountains and rivers, there were tiny specks of lights around the city. Where there were lights, there were people. Even as eternal peace was undergoing dramatic change, these tenacious people were still trying their best to survive. There was a different sort of beauty felt as he sat within the moon palace to look out at the mortal world. The high and mighty celestial heavens which had eternal day would never be able to enjoy the beauty of the shadows, and they wouldn't be able to see the hope within the hearts of the people who lit up lanterns in the dark. The moonlight shone brightly, and the moon formation in the sky map had opened up again and was soon to become a full moon. Qin Mu felt that he must have slept for at least 5 or 6 days. What brings you here? He looked sideways at the face of the girl beside him and asked. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor bumped into me, and we discussed swords for a few days. Then I heard that a girl named Si Yunxiang had sent out people to look around for the 4 great heavenly teachers and 4 great heavenly kings of Founding Emperor, saying that Son of Qin was in trouble and thus wanted them to go to the northern heavens to help. Bai Chuer continued. Therefore, I hurried over here first, intending to enter the palace of Mahakala through the sky map. I had just cleaned out the gods from the extraterritorial celestial heavens, in the sky map, when Fatty Dragon brought you over. Qin Mu came to a sudden realization and laughed. Sneaking into the palace of Mahakala from the sky map, and even attacking Mahakala from his blind side, truly brilliant ideas. It would be able to avoid his senses. Bai Chuer smiled. Yes, indeed. When you were unconscious when Tianga, Han Tang, Yan Yunxi, and the others all came searching, they also entered through the sky map. 3 of the 4 great heavenly teachers of Founding Emperor also came by. Han Tang wanted to tear open a hole in the sky map and send a fishing line into the palace of Mahakala to fish you out. Han Tang was the name of Heavenly Teacher Fisherman, while Yan Yunxi was Heavenly Teacher Zishi's name, though Yan Yunxi was the name she only used when she was dressed as a female. Heavenly Teacher Fisherman claimed that his hooks never went out for naught, so he may really have been able to fish Qin Mu up. Yin Yunqi intended to set up a formation to attack Mahakala from his blind side. But when Tiange said that Eternal Peace and Mahakala didn't have any grudges between them, and that there was a possibility for a neutral relationship, Bai Chuer smiled. They all care about you a lot and only left when they saw that you were out of danger. How are your injuries? Qin Mu felt a warmth in his heart. Speaking of which, it's strange. When I woke up, all my injuries were healed. I had damaged my origin and initially expected that I would need to recuperate for a few years before I could cultivate to my peak. What spirit medicine did you feed me? He was very puzzled, as damaging his origin meant that his injuries were extremely serious. Even if he was a grandmaster in the art of healing, he would have to search for rare spirit medicine and slowly nurse his body into recovery. Even so, he would require at least a few years to replenish the deficiency in his body. Bai Chuer had fed him medicine and used the dragon bead to condition his primordial spirit, which led him to assume that it was the effect of her spirit medicine. The spirit medicines that I gave you weren't anything special. They just helped to keep you alive, and weren't able to treat the root of your injuries. However, I realized that while you were asleep, your wounds slowly healed by themselves. I'm very puzzled as well. Bai Chuer pondered over it. While you were unconscious, when Tiange and the others came and sensed that you were performing self-recovery, when Tiange mentioned that a dharma was working in strange ways within your body, and it was as though it had made you relive your life. But where this dharma came from, he wasn't too sure. I wasn't able to detect its origins either. Qin Mu felt a slight jolt in his heart. It was like he had relived his life, and then all his injuries had healed. Even his origin had returned to its peak condition. This technique seemed to be related to Brahma Buddha's way of entering the path through dreams. Could it be that he had cultivated Brahma Buddha's Emperor's Throne's true scriptures in his sleep? But he had never learned this technique before. Back then, Brahma Buddha had told him that there was a Buddha within his Qin word land that contained his Emperor's Throne true scriptures, but that it would require Qin Mu's own comprehension to be able to learn it. However, the Qin word land had always been dominated by his brother Qin Fengqing, so the time he had spent in there wasn't long. Thus, he didn't have the opportunity to comprehend it. So when exactly did he learn it? Without learning it or comprehending it, he had obtained this Emperor's Throne technique. It was all too strange. Suddenly, Bai Chuer stood up and stretched her hand towards him with a beautiful smile. Do you want to see the real galaxy? Qin Mu stared at her blankly before reaching his hand out, holding her hand. Bai Chuer held onto his hand and flew about the sky map, flying away from the moon. She smiled and said, the astronomical phenomena within the sky map are fake. They are all formations. However, behind the sky map lies the real galaxy. I know of a hole in the sky map. If you go out from there, then you will be able to see the true galaxy. Qin Mu couldn't help but follow her. Turning his head around to look, he saw that within the moonlight in front of the moon palace, the dragon Qilin, who had dozed off by a pillar, had also now stood up to look towards them, seemingly wanting to run over to see the real galaxy as well. Qin Mu gave him a fierce look, and the dragon Qilin quickly stopped in his tracks, lying back down and continuing his nap. Qin Mu revealed a smile as the girl held on to his hand as they roamed the sky map together. They flew by the galaxy of the sky map. The stars were formed by various complicated formations, and their structure was extremely complex. The gods who were here were already eradicated by Bai Chuer, and there was no one guarding the formations now. Although the galaxy was fake, flying through it as the brilliant starlight spilled all around them was still very romantic. When Tiange said that he was going to ask Emperor Yanfeng to send some scholars who were skilled in algebra to come and maintain the workings of the sky map, Bai Chuer brought him through the galaxy. Over there is the sun within the sky map. Within the sky map, during the day the stars will dull, and there will be no light in the galaxy. Only the sun will radiate light. However, when night comes, the sun will extinguish. Qin Mu looked in the direction she was pointing. The sun's formation had already stopped its work at this time. It was a circular formation in the form of a teleportation door. The insides of the formation were empty except for a sun palace within. As he had guessed, the formation borrowed the rays of the real sun in order to give off light and heat. The hole in the sky map is over here. Bai Chuer arrived at the sun palace, bringing him into the palace. She smiled and said, however, This hole will only appear when the sun formation is lit up. Then we will be able to fly out of it to see the real galaxy. Qinmu blinked, replying, "It's night in eternal peace now." Bai Chuer gave a sound of acknowledgement. "When we light up the sun, the moon and the sun will appear in the night sky at the same time," Qinmu continued. Bai Chuer acknowledged this with an expression of pity on her face. Qinmu broke out into a wide smile. "Then let's do it." Bai Chuer whooped with joy, sprinting to the center of the palace where there was a huge scarlet-red cloth made out of an unknown material. There were 3 golden crow images embroidered on it, and there was something below holding up the huge cloth. Bai Chuer tugged off the cloth with her might, revealing a stand. On the stand was a palm imprint formed by an exquisite rune pattern. She pressed her palm on the pattern, looking to Qinmu with some hesitation. "Are we really lighting up the sun? Will it be too shocking?" Qinmu laughed. "The citizens of eternal peace are long used to this. If we're talking about shocking events, a sun appearing in the night sky cannot be compared to the likes of the seal of the primordial realm being broken through. These past few years, the citizens of eternal peace have witnessed the explosion of natural disasters, the transformation of the surging river into the celestial river, the numerous revivals of gods and devils, and the appearances of heavens within the sky. Their ability to withstand changes is way stronger than we have imagined." Bai Chuer was relieved. She worked her vital qi and there was a buzz from the stand. Following that, the buzzing sound continued to flow around them along the ground. Very soon, the formation runes outside the Sun Palace lit up, and the runes turned a crimson red as the formation started to spin and extended out in all 4 directions. At this time, eternal peace hadn't entered the deep of the night. There were still many homes lit up with lanterns. In the cities, the lights were even brighter, and there were still people wandering around the night markets. However, the sun in the sky suddenly rose without warning, hanging high up and dissipating the night sky in a short instant. That wasn't all, the moon remained in the sky, and the radiance of the moon was actually not all that inferior compared to the sun. It was an extremely dazzling sight. The citizens of eternal peace were all in shock, and even the gods, devils, and half-gods of Yuandu were astonished by this sight. Countless people raised their heads to look up at the sky in a daze. Within the Sun Palace, Bai Chuer gripped Qinmu's hand and sprinted off, her laughter ringing out from ahead. "Quick! Let's get out of here before the gods and devils come looking." Qinmu's heart was palpitating. He followed her to the center of the sun formation, where there was a huge black spot that was incredibly unpleasant to look at. Bai Chuer grabbed him and leaped into the center of the black spot. Her clothes flipped about and flapped onto Qinmu's face. Qinmu raised his free hand to push her skirt and pockets out of his face, and he saw that they had already jumped out of the sun formation and the sky map, and they were out of the fake astrological phenomena. They were now floating about in the boundless starry skies of the universe. Behind them was the sky map of an unknown length and distance, and in front of them, there was an enormous fireball floating in the incredibly silent universe. It was incomparably colossal beyond imagination. Standing before this sun, they were as small and insignificant as ants. Bai Chuer suddenly grabbed him and took flight. As quick as a flickering shadow and with unimaginable speed, she flew upwards. Raising a hand and pointing towards a direction, she laughed and said, "Look there." Qinmu followed the direction of her finger, and saw the numerous heavens looking like gems mounted on the skies beyond the primordial realm. Within the colossal gems, there were sun, moon, and stars, resembling the innumerous bright spots beset within the gems, flickering before their eyes. They flew past the outside of these enormous gems, the world barriers like an invisible thin film that gently bounced them off when they were too close. Bai Chuer borrowed the momentum from the world barriers to allow herself to speed up, taking Qinmu to roam about the void. They flew away from the real sun, but Qinmu raised his head and saw another sun. It was dull and radiating a dull red glow. Above this sun, he saw yet another dull red sun. Over there was the 33 heavens of Founding Emperor. Bai Chuer continued to bring him about. Founding Emperor had built 33 worlds here, but these heavens have already been annihilated. She brought Qinmu past the first extinguished sun, and going around it, they saw the colossal galaxy. "That's the eye of Heaven, Duke. He should be able to see us." Bai Chuer waved excitedly towards that galaxy lump. Qinmu also waved excitedly at it. He was so exhilarated his face was red. Within the Qin word land, the clone of Heaven Duke snorted, and he turned to Lava Earth Count. I can see this rascal already, he looks pleased as punch. Lava Earth Count instead looked towards the little Earth Count, who was excitedly sticking his head into the slaughter cauldron with his bottom sticking out, replying, "Is he as pleased as him?" Qin Fengqing was systematically counting his spoils of war inside the cauldron, and didn't hear what they were talking about. Great Sun Sovereign flapped his wings and got up. Lying atop the Qin word land, his 3 claws gripped onto the top of the sky like a huge bat lying on the rooftop as he borrowed Qin Mu's line of vision to look at the outside world greedily. "The brightest sun just now, it's where I was born. It's Yuandu's only godly son." Great Sun Sovereign continued to mumble, "Where I was born, the first and sharpest cry of the crow. I still remember running across the sky as I pulled the sun along." Suddenly, before his eyes was darkness. Qin Mu had taken out the willow leaf and covered up his third eye, so he was no longer able to see the outside sights. "Jerk, remove it quickly." Great Sun Sovereign continued to yell, "I want to see my hometown." Crimson Emperor's consciousness pulled him down. "He's out there flirting, why are you trying to be an extra? We've barely managed to have some footing here, and we're borrowing shelter inside here. You should stop being so demanding." Great Sun Sovereign stuck his head back. "You are borrowing shelter while I am a prisoner here. We're not the same. Say, what do you think they are doing right now that they can't let us see?"